B'Shem Madonoi Mamli Easy Ale Yagon Olai Idavoy Hineko Shavas Pasami Meyeres Marchakim Ha'adunoi Ein B'Sion Imalka Ebo Madua Hichisuni B'Fsilehem B'Havle Necho Ovar Kotzir Kol Koyes Vanachnu Lo Noshanu Al Shevet Basami Hoshbarti Kodarti Shama Echazikosni Katsori Ein Bigilad Imrofe Ein Sham Ki Madua Lo Olsa Aruchas Basami Mitain Roshi Mayim Veni Mekor Dima Levke Yomon Bolaila Eis Chavali Basami Mitaneni Vamidba Melon Orechim Vezvo Esami Bielecha Meitan Ticholam Min Afim Atzeres Bogadim Vayadruchu Es Lishonam Chashtam Sheker Below Lemuna Govru Va'aretz Eki Meira El Ra'a Yatzahu Vyosilo Yadahu Numadunai Ishmereyehu Shameru Vyal Kolach Al Tiftahu Kichol Och Akov Yaakov Vichol Reya Rachil Yahalav V'ishmereyehu Yihoselu Ve'emes Lo Yedaberu Lemdu Lishonam Gaber Sheker Havenilu Shiftecha Besoch Mirma B'mirma Me'anu Das Ausi Numadunoi Lochein Ko Amar Adonai Tzvos Hineni Tzorafam Ubachantim Ki Ein E'ese Mipnei Basami Chet Shachut Lishonam Mirma Diber Bifi Shalom Esraelu Yidaber Uvekir Bo Yosim Arbo Al Eled Lo Efkod Bom Numadunoi Im Bigoy Asher Kozeh Lo Sisnakeim Nafshi Al Hehorim Esav V'chit Bonehi Yal Naos Midbar Kina Kin Zesu Mibli Ish Over V'lo Shamu Kol Mikneh Me'ov HaShomayim Yad Behema Nodedu Holachu V'nasati Yes Yerushalayim Legaliyim Me'on Taniyim V'yes Orei Yehuda Eten Shemama Mibli Yoshei Mio Ish Echacham Yovein Ezos V'asher Diber V'Adonai Eila V'Yagida Al Moch of the Haaretz V'Tzisach HaMidbar Mibli Over Vayomer Adonai Al Ozvam Es Horosi Asher Nasati Lifnehem V'lo Sham'u B'Koli Lo Halchu Bam Vayelechu Acharei Shirus Liban V'Acharei Habolim Asher Lemedum Avosam Lochein Ko Amar Adonai Tzvos Elhei Yisrael Hineni Machilam Es Hamazeh Lano Vishkisim Meirosh V'Havitosim Bagoyim Asher Lo Yodu Hema Bavosam V'Shilachti Achreihem Al Escherev Ad Kalosi Osam Ko Amar Adonai Tzvos His Bonenu V'Kiru Lamakonenos Usavo Enda V'Yelachachamos Yilechu V'Savona Usamaherna V'Sisena Oleinu Nehi V'Siradno Einenu Dima V'Afapenu Yizlomayim Ki Kol Nehi Nishma Mitzion Eich Shudadnu Boshnu Miok Yozavnu Oret Ki Yishlichu Mishkenosenu Kishimanu Noshim Dvar Adonai V'Sikach Oznachem Dvar Piv Lameidna v'nosechem nehi b'isharusa kina. Ki Allah mo v'espechalonenu bo be'armenoseinu. Lachris olo michutz b'achurim mirchovos daber. Kol Adonai v'naflo yivlas adam kidomen al pnei hasodeh u'chi'amir m'acharei hakotzer v'ein b'anei. Kol Amar Adonai al yishalel chacham b'chachmaso v'al yishalel hagibor b'gvuraso al yishalel ashir b'yashro Yim bezos yishalel ham yishalel haskel yodot osi ki ani Adonai oseh chesed mishpat saka ba'aretz kiv'ele chafatzti num Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shor kol olamim tzaddik b'chol hadavos shoel v'ne'emon v'omer v'yoseh המדבר מקיים שבכל דבר אמת וצדק נאמון אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו נאמונים דבריך ודבר אחד מספריך עוד לא ישוב ריקם כי אל מלך נאמון וכמותו ברוך אתה אדוני ברוך הנאמון בכל דברו לכן ציון כי היא בייס חיינו לבס נפש אשר בהרב ימינו ברוך אתה אדוני שמר ציון מבונך שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו אלוהיה הנביא עבדך מלכוס בית דוד משכך מהרה יבוא ויוגע ליבנו על כיסא ישב זו ולא יכלו זאת אחרים אס כבודו כי בשם קודשך משפטו לו שלום נכבד נאווה אלם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד אמן.
חושבים לך ולשובו, חדי שלנו כקדם. Everybody can be seated. Spin the video. Get one second. Video? It's on. Yes.
Is it working? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
It's just for the video. So in a minute, or in a couple of minutes, we'll start with a keynote. I just want to introduce them. Actually, a halachic question came up. Akiva, who unfortunately is in the midst of Shiva, losing his beloved mom. And the question is, what's the practice if one's in that difficult situation of a personal loss, painful personal loss of Shiva on Tisha B'Av. So, thanks to the situation, I looked a little bit more into it. The keeper right away knew what to do. Took me a little time to catch up. Keeper said that he's going to come to synagogue this morning. And indeed in Shulchan Aruch, that's what it says, the great code of Jewish law, 16th century of Rabbi Yosef Karo. His summary of Jewish law in the Tisha B'Av, the laws of Tisha B'Av, is that a mourner comes to synagogue. But if you look in the earlier sources, it's actually a little bit more intricate or interesting. It's based on a teaching of Rabbeinu Asher, who is the great 13th century authority who moved from Germany to Spain and brought a lot of the halachic practices from Ashkenaz towards Sephardic lands. And he explains what's going on here when there's this interface between a personal grieving, and a collective grieving. And he says that in general, if it's not Tisha B'Av, let's say it's somebody, God forbid, loses a nuclear member of their family and is sitting Shiva. So the halacha of Shiva is, right, one sits for 7 days in one's home. One doesn't go to work, one doesn't really go out, one's in one's home. Can somebody during Shiva pay a Shiva visit to somebody else? Right? A very real life situation, a sad situation. The two people are sitting Shiva. So can a mourner, not on Tisha B'Av, throughout the year, can a mourner go visit another mourner? So the halacha is that during the first 3 days of mourning, during the first 3 days, a mourner does not leave their home and cannot pay a Shiva visit to another person. I'm giving the broad contours. If God forbid there's some specific situation that should be discussed. The broad contours are that during the first 3 days, a person does not leave their home who's in mourning. From day 4 through 7, they may leave their home and pay a Shiva visit in theory to somebody else. What's the difference? We usually think of the immediacy of losing somebody, the process up until burial, which has a halachic name. It's called aninut, being onain. Again, if the terms are less familiar, no problem, but good to introduce them. Onain is the state of a person until their loved one is buried. And then from burial on, the person is a mourner and sits Shiva for 7 days. So usually in our mind frame, we don't really think about this 3-day rule. But the Talmud tells us that actually the first 3 days of Shiva are the most intense. And the Talmud tells us 3 days for Bechi. There are 3 days for crying. From day 4 through 7, one already, as much as one can, again, these are broad guidelines, recognizes that different people have different temperaments. But still, broadly speaking, the first 3 days is a time for intense crying. And from day 4 through 7 already is a time for some more composure. And there are various rules about the first 3 days. They're not so familiar. And again, I think that's less sort of enforced, but in terms of guidelines, like the interacting that we refrain from doing on Tisha B'Av, of greeting one another, those halachot are more strict during the first 3 days of Shiva. Because the first 3 days, a person is very consumed, the mourner, in their pain, in their crying, disconnected. And so one doesn't exchange greetings in the same way. From day 4 through 7, there's already more space for connections of sorts. And that's why also it makes sense now that we could think about this idea, paying a Shiva visit to another mourner. The first 3 days, the mourner is totally inward consumed in their own pain. And from day 4 through 7, when they hopefully have a bit more composure, they could interact with others, they could greet others, others could greet them a bit more, and they could pay a Shiva visit. Everybody's following the general analysis? So, there are Achronim who say that on Tisha B'Av, again, this is not the common practice. I'm just trying to lay out some concepts for us to think about. There are Achronim that say what would happen if there's a private mourner on Tisha B'Av situation. Kiva, it's okay, I'm using you, case in point. So there are some who say that in the first 3 days of a private mourning, a private mourner is caught up in their own mourning and would not come to synagogue, would not participate in the national mourning that we're all going through now on Tisha B'Av. And there's a logic there. Just like a mourner would not visit another mourner in the first 3 days, so too a mourner, a private mourner, would not join the collective mourning in the first 3 days of Shiva. But this does not seem to be the prevailing practice, and that's why Akiva's intuition was right, that in the Shulchan Aruch, again, based on Rabbeinu Asher, the 16th century, growing on the traditions of the 13th century, they say that a private mourner does come to shul on Tisha B'Av, especially in the morning. Interesting. In other words, right now we're really in the most intense part of Tisha B'Av, and that's why we're going to take a bit of time to say keynote together, which are expressions of elegies, but expressions of our mourning, our national trauma, our scars over centuries, too many scars, 2,000 years of wounds, of pain, and they're open wounds, right? For 364 days a year, where we walk around with a bit of a stoic expression. We have our Band-Aids on. Well, once a year we take off the Band-Aids and we still feel the pain, the collective pain. And that's what Tisha B'Av is. And in that experience, the halacha says that even a private mourner, even in their first 3 days, it's the one time they break that pattern, that even in the first 3 days, they join the community. They join the national mourning, right? The saying that we say whenever we go visit somebody during Shiva, when we try to console, we say that Hamakom, God, should comfort you, b'toch shar Avlei Tzion, along with all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Well, right now we are all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And even a private mourner joins in, is part of that collective. We're all in that same space, in that same emotional place for one day, and especially the morning of this day, up until Chatzot. We're all in this place of Avleit Zion Yerushalayim. We are all mourning together. And even the private mourner, their individual mourning is added tears to a collective mourning, to a national mourning that we're all experiencing together. So there's no room for private space. Not this morning. This is the place of Shiva. We're all in the place of Shiva. We're all sitting together in the place of Shiva. Actually, Rav Soloveitchik would say it even more powerfully. This is like the moment of Aninut. It's even maybe prior to burial, or it's the most intense part, or, it's actually interesting in the analogies in Halakha, you find all of it. It's the moment of, God forbid, loss, or we're saying it's sort of like the first 3 days, or maybe it's like day 4 through 7, but everybody collectively is in that same space. Nobody could be in a different moment. We're all in it together right now. We're all in it together because that's really always the Jewish way. Of course, there's everybody individually with their lot and their plight, but there are times where the collective overwhelms the individual, and that's what Tisha B'Av is. Now it's interesting, just a little bit more, I just want to add just another point or two, and then we'll get to the keynote related to this. The Talmud compares personal mourning and collective mourning, meaning the individual mourning and the national mourning of Tisha B'Av in this time of year. And the Talmud uses the following terminology, which Rav Soloveitchik in particular was fond of quoting. The way I know that is because his students and his students write about it and talk about it and repeat it. So I learned in that tradition as well. The Talmud says in Yevamot that there is Avelut Chadasha and Avelut Yeshana. That's the terminology of the Talmud. You know those terms? Chadash, new, Yeshan, old. So Avelut Chadasha means the fresh wound of mourning, right? New in a painful sense. A personal loss, a private loss. God forbid somebody loses a nuclear family member, a member of their nuclear family. That is Avelut Chadasha, a new, a fresh wound. And the Talmud compares and contrasts this to Avelut Yeshana, an ancient Avelut, an ancient mourning. What's ancient? 2,000 years, right? That's ancient. 2,500 years. That's ancient, right? On this day, we're mourning, actually, the Churban of Shiloh. I don't know the exact dates of that, but that's 8th century, 7th century BC. Then we're mourning the first temple, 6th century BC. We're mourning the second temple, 1st century CE. Bar Kokhba, Beitar, 2nd century CE, right? And sadly, the list goes on and on. Especially we pause at certain places. Ashkenaz, 11th, 12th century CE. In burning of the Talmud, 13th century CE. We have elegies from Kinot, from Sfarad, expulsion, 15th century, late 15th century CE. Think of Chmelnytsky, 17th century CE. And of course, we get to the Shoah, 20th century CE. And this year, with great pain, we get to the 21st century. And we get to 2023, 2024 in the secular count. Right? This year, it's very hard to use that terminology of Avilut Yishana, ancient mourning, versus Avilut Chadasha, fresh mourning. Because the ancient blurs with the fresh, right? The old and the new are intermingled. Actually, the wounds, they're too new, they're too raw. I brought here, and I hope at the very end we'll get to it, keynote that were written this year, in the last few months and few weeks, written by survivors from Kibbutz Be'eri, right? Who would think that there would be a Kinah that was written this year? Kinah is the stuff of crusades, right? Kinah is the stuff of the Kalir in the 6th century. Kinah is what Jeremiah wrote in the 5th century BC. Kinah in 21st century CE, and the answer terribly is yes. We said we walk around with wounds of millennia, but also wounds of months and weeks and hours. So this year, I think more than ever, sadly, the answer to Akiva's query, which he himself intuited, was, of course, a personal mourner leaves the Shiva home and comes to a collective Shiva home where we're all sitting together, Shiva. We're sitting Shiva for thousands of years of pain and tragedy and grief, and also 300 plus days of pain, anguish, and grief. For one day, we're immersed in this space, but as we'll see in the keynote, with all the anguish and all the anger and all the screams, there is always a thread that a providential God is here with us, mourns with us, and will heal us, and will bring consolation to us all together soon. So let's turn to the keynote, and we'll read. We're going to try not to, we're not going to, this is the deal, it's okay with you, we're not going to read all of them. We'll read a selection of them, and we'll try to take them in a bit, if we can, as much as we can. Those who could be with us for the next bit, that's great. Those who could only join first part, that's okay too. We start on page 91. When possible, I'm going to try to say some things just a little bit and highlight some things, but also whoever wants to read parts, please signal to me also. So we'll start on page 91. And this is the word Shabbat. We know the word Shabbat, right? It sounds like the word Shabbat, right? So what does Shabbat? Shabbat usually brings a smile to our face. Here, it's a different type of emphasis on the same term. What does Shabbat literally mean? What does the term Shabbat mean? To cease, to stop. So towards the very end of Eicha, the book of Lamentations that we read last night, we discussed a minyan during the week. There's a discussion really, when should you read Eicha? Last night or this morning? There's a discussion about that. So our common practice is to read it last night. But this morning we have these keynote, and the keynote often pick up on phrases from Eicha. So Shabbat Mesos Mikol Haaretz, I think that's the verse in Eicha, towards the end of Eicha. So based on that, we have this Kinah. Kinah literally means, Lekonein means to, like an elegy, to cry, to weep, to lament. Lament, I think that's the right English word. So, so these are laments that were written over the course of Jewish history. And they build on verses of Eicha, and also midrashim of the rabbis, and also the poetic sensibilities of the author. So we'll read it in a minute. I just want to say something. You know what? Maybe we read it out, and then that way we get going, and I'll say something afterwards. So let's read together on page 91. Shabbat, Surumeni. So let's all read together, and I'll try to pause here and there and just outline it. Surumeni Shimuni Afrai, Siumos, Simuni Bedre Chaberai, Sakota Mishkan, Miskot Tiburai. Sakota means to like Sukkah. Sukkah is a booth that we stay in, but Sakota is like a barrier. So God, you placed a barrier on our words, right? That's said in Eicha also, that we can't, there's a distance between us and God. We feel rejected by God. But kinot are, in a way, rebelling, right? On the one hand, we're saying, God, there's a barrier between us and you, but we're rebelling, we're speaking, and we're lamenting. And God, hear our laments. Let's keep going on. Sakota v'pebugi barai, sakuka v'marubu evarai, sila kol avirai. Second stanza. Nafla odenu mitzul tchiyah, eni chikda lechazon ben Berachia. Ben Berachia was the cousin of Jeremiah, and he promised that there will be better days ahead. He said, purchase land in the land of Israel, even as you're going out into exile in Babylon. Purchase land. Believe in Israel, right? If you, I feel like I could hear Jonathan saying something like this. Buy real estate in Israel now. By the way, I heard that if you want to buy in the south, near Gaza, near those kibbutzim, it's not cheap now. It's not cheap to buy real estate there. That's what I was told when I visited Israel recently. Because we have the faith of Ben Berachia. Ben Berachia, the cousin of Jeremiah, who said, purchase land in the land of Israel. We don't care what Moody's is saying, right? Okay, right now we're going to go through some tough times. We're realists, even economically in Israel. But purchase land. This is where the future is. Keep going on in the second stanza. Ad kivei Gilgal chavuya, nima lolale bevani dechuya, asab nicham bikra l'tchiya v'nam. Alayla mibochia, Valdiza cry, Apnei prat nuptu chasideya, Pagesu sakraka ruyisodeya, Pachat chet Shiloh, Tachaf sodeya. Shiloh was the tabernacle that was destroyed. So they were scared. Now the temple will also be destroyed. Patu chasireya, Ayeh chasideya, Patu maser, Valindiya, Persat Zion, Beyadeya. Fourth line. Al har Tzion, Sadir Sheonim Adonai, Tzafu Arosh Adonai, Tzamtu Benov Lamot Adonai, Tzod Natzarta Larem Adonai, Tza'ak Ami B'nei Ben Dinai, Tzadiku Adonai. So in the midst of all the pain, we also affirm God's Sidkut. That's called Tziduk Hadin. We recognize God's righteousness. Even as we're in pain and anguish and anger, we know that ultimately it's a God of justice. We turn the page to 92. Takalim hifadata medi ermoni, karafta bo elai v'chamuni, kolila shmiya ba'arev hekrimuni, karati l'shveikim v'angivon gam hein zirmuni, kumi aborek v'tel hermuni, karati l'ma'avai heima rimuni. I called my ma'avai means my lovers, but it's an allusion, I think, to allies. That, allies, thank God, right now we have, some very strong allies for Israel, but allies are not always reliable. And that's the story over here. Sometimes we have to have inner strength and faith. That's the powerful thing most powerful thing of all. 92, next stanza. Lama rocha penotef shamaru, va'ita tichnadnu oro, Amaru, Raita Kiyama, Lachaspe, Yuta, Kamaru, Rafta B'Cheska, B'Cheska Linko, Amaru, Re'Ben Achidem, Nigoy, Amaru, Adonai, Kitzali, Me'aycham, Amaru. Towards the middle of the page. Ashivenu, Sisi Shima, Lekoitza Anai, Shiftam Ramos Chatzira Lakieni, Siftein Meshorai, Kvir Damamo, Adieni Shamata, Kismarota, Fechimata, Ani, Shaku Benadu, Patzatza, Prieni, Shabukin, and Kani. Okay, last stanza. Kitam Chakta, Beches Ofanecha. Let me just pause on that one. this in particular, Rav Soloveitchik, as I read in notes, he would emphasize this line. The line is that Tam chakta bekes ofanecha. It's a hard line, actually. But what it means, chakta means to inscribe. Okay? Like a chok, it means like an edict, but it means to, lechokek means to engrave. Case comes like from which word? The Hebrew word? Kisei. Okay? So engrave in the kisei, in the seat, but we're talking about the seat of ofanecha. Do you know from davening what's the ofanim? The ofanim and the chayot HaKodesh is an allusion to the angels. So your angelic chair, meaning your throne, meaning God's throne. So chak, engraved in God's throne, is tam. What's tam? An allusion to Jacob, to the patriarch Yaakov, who is described as Ish Tam, Yoshev Ohalim. So this is actually quite an amazing line here. Tam is chakta bekes ofanecha. God, what's engraved on your throne? Right? We all know how to go to an interior designer, and we're in this magnificent, right, synagogue. We know how we, with such great care, we, for an apartment, for a house, more so for a magnificent synagogue. God, what's engraved on your celestial throne? And the answer is an image of Jacob. An image of Jacob is engraved on the divine throne. What does that mean? That's mysterious stuff, right? But the poet here, we'll talk about who he is in 1 minute. The poet tells us mysteries from on high based on tradition. And he says that on the divine throne is an image of the beloved Jacob, which surely signifies not just Jacob, but Jacob and Jacob's children, meaning Bnei Yaakov, Bnei Israel, meaning us. As much as we have suffered, we know, God, the secret was on your throne. And what's on your throne is an image of our patriarch, meaning an image of Israel. We're on God's throne, and God will not neglect us no matter what happens. And this is part of the consolation also of this day. Kitam Chakta, again, bottom of 92. Kitam Chakta b'chesef panecha, tashiv lahem gmul, ke'az chazot panecha, shedofet tzamon yotzei ra'atz panecha, tikem ha'avet yotzei tfinecha, tikra l'shakram kos kamus b'panecha, which means God, give the poisonous drink to the enemy. Tavo kol ra'atam lefanecha. And nowadays it's not hard to have in mind some of the enemies that we could have in mind who deserve the poisonous cup. Tavo el tzar shekilanu, bottom line 92. Tavo el tzar shekilanu, l'vo chamat l'cheman yehanu, al lachalchach v'chor hilanu, zachar, zakinu b'chur k'tula kavalnu, ram habeitna, amchak kulanu, skor Adonai, nehaya lanu. Let me just say one general thing. Again, I'm going to go a little slower first, and then we'll pick up a little steam, so don't get worried. But I think it's a little more. I heard, I understood that Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin, famous yeshiva, right? Does anybody know Chaim Berlin? You've heard of it, right? So apparently, in Chaim Berlin, they say 1 or 2 kinos. That's it, because you can't really have great concentration. That's not a suggestion I give you. But the point is, sometimes we say in halakha, better a little with some kavanah than a lot. The Hebrew here is so challenging. These are something I was speaking to my dad last night, and I said that I'm going to try to help out a little with some of this keynote and give a little explanation and stuff. And my dad's like, those are so difficult. They really are. They're so difficult, and without good English translations and without commentaries, and it's really, really hard to follow. But they're actually magnificent. Magnificent. They're very sad, but they're poetic constructions that are dazzling. You could read descriptions in some of the keynote now today, which describes a little of the poetic style here. the meter, the allusions. There's actually, this one that we just read, literally taken from Eicha in a very structured way, from chapter 5 in Eicha, then chapter 4 in Eicha, then chapter 3 in Eicha, and parallel. Like a real challenge, a bard's challenge. Whoever wrote this really not just had a mastery of Eicha and mastery of rabbinic midrashim, but also was a master poet.
Master of Hebrew.
A master of Hebrew, and it's a challenge that, you wonder who could do this. So who could do this? So I want to say something about who the early poems. You'll see it says here, I think it says, if you look on page 91, although in English it says, you look in the top of 91 on the right side on the Hebrew. It says, right after that little description, it says by Kalir, and then you see interesting. It says 7th century question mark. So it's a big question. Who is this Kalir? So scholars, I think by this point, are pretty confident that they know who this Kalir is, more or less, when he lived. I think around 7th century. In tradition, meaning Tosfot, for example. Tosfot says the Kalir, he was a Tana, and he lived during the Tannaitic period, meaning in the 2nd century. And then there's another tradition, I think one links him to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, another to Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, I think. Then there are traditions that he lives in the 2nd century, in the 7th century, in the 10th century, in the 11th century. There were different, these are not just, these were traditions that were said about Kalir by extremely learned people over the course of Jewish history. Now we have some methods that scholars have developed to try to, maybe get a bit more out of historic answer. But Rosenzweig, my Rebbe, said that whatever the exact reality is, it's quite amazing that there could be these different theories about when this poet lived. Because usually a poet has certain signs, certain, ticks, if you will, and tricks and ticks that are illusions, signatures that show where they live, their context. Right? If you would read a poem, again, I'm not, I can't discern these things so well, but I think as somebody who knows poetry well could read the poem and have some sense of, when were these words used, when was that in style, when was this formula, and wouldn't confuse a 16th century poet, wouldn't confuse a Shakespearean sonnet with something that was written by, Arnold in the 19th century. Or by Robert Frost in the 20th century. But here with the Kalir, there are different theories, which show that the Kalir somehow transcended his time and space. And he really was able to enter into what for us is a little challenging, which is Jewish history in all its times, in all its places, which is what we tried to do this morning. We tried this morning to think about ancient destructions and modern destructions and medieval destructions, and try to recognize that these are not isolated, and there are connections, and there are patterns, and there's a continuum. And the Kalir somehow is probably the most powerful, the most evocative, the one who is able to really conjure up through very challenging Hebrew, so we have to look a little in English and highlight a few words and lines here and there, but still he helps us enter into this continuum of Jewish tragedy, but also Jewish consolation. Okay, let's turn to the next one, which is on the very next page, 93, and then we'll skip a bit, but let's keep going to 93. So this is Eicha Atzta Ba'Tafra. It's also written by Kalir, and a lot of it expresses, vents a lot of anger. Right, that's the opening line. How in thy wrath thou dost hasten to destroy thy faithful ones. Right, this is anger. Echa, right? How could you do it? And who's the you? God. Right? This is brazen stuff. This is the kind of stuff that if you said in front of your Rebbe, if you were in a yeshiva in third grade, I don't know, you get a little touch, right? But more than little, right? How could you, God? But right, there's something heretical almost. God, how could you? How could you? How could you take the Edomites over us? Right? How can you take the Romans over us? How can you take Christendom over us, or Islam over us, or think the 20th and 21st century? How can you give the upper hand? How are we sitting here scared of Iran? Why are we scared of Iran? Who's Iran? Iran's blasphemous to the Almighty. Well, why does Iran have any power in this universe? Right? That's the thrust of this. Who's Sinwar, right? That's the thrust of this kinah. How could you, God? And it's usually not the way we approach God, right? But on Tisha B'Av, we see from, and again, this Rav Soloveitchik would emphasize this a lot, we see from Yirmiyahu, we see from Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, Echa, how could it be? In shock, how could it be? And shock is a form of wailing and crying and mourning, but also turning to God and saying, God, you're the providential God. Maybe us humans, we fall short, but God, you're the God of covenant and the God of mercy. So how could it be? And we ask these questions, but we obviously don't just leave it there at those questions. We also recognize our part, our responsibility, and God's justice too. But we also give vent to some of that just raw, how could this be? Which is a legitimate part of our tradition, right? This is the strength of our tradition. Even in very specific times and places, together, turn to God and ask those questions. How could this be, God? As long as we continue on in that process and also continue to try to think about our role in God's justice as well. So page 93. Maybe. Just for the reading. 93.
Echa so bilabacho abebiat adonim amunecha uzacharte prisbei besarim ashibarata lechunecha ucheimot ibitino Echa gaarta b'narasacha laglos biat gerim geulecha uzacharte diligus dilu derech asher dibarta litkolecha ucheim dibarta If a hata behenulecha, adopia kolali hamulecha, uzachata vitu biu beses, asher bi'ata udecha, uchein bekomnion. Echa zanachta bezamacha, zalzilbia zalim dizulecha, uzachata kitu chukei churei, asher hakakta lachamulecha, uchein chivinu. Echa torachta, v'torchacha, v'tropia tepeim t'loecha, v'zacharto yikari gidus yosher, asher yichadto yodecha, v'chein elalnu. Echa kivanta v'chasava, v'chalos biad koshtin karecha, v'zacharto lo yizdachta lo, asher yimadata l'luchecha, v'chein lahadnu. Echa b'lata b'mo'asava, b'chos biad mourning minasecha, v'lozacharta nesias notzas nesher, asher asasu l'nsuecha, v'chein lahinu. Echa sachta b'sarcha, sager biad se'afim b'sardecha, v'lozacharta os adi adiyim, asher tarta lavadecha, v'chein adinu.
Page 94.
Echa, pasta b'vachatacha, b'fageria ponitzin b'loecha, v'zacharta, sahalastri tzedek, asher tefanta l'tzvoecha, v'chein za'agnu. Echa korosa b'kriyasacha, lagnos biad komi kruecha, v'zacharta regesh rega pribosayim, asher tisa l'reecha, v'chein ragagnu. בכל שאפתו ושאפו, לשאלות ביד שלמיך, לא זכרת תוקף פלפלי צוהר, אשר תיקנת לשמיתך, ובכי תעננו, תעננו לשפוט כמוהם, על מה ירוזך השפינו פעמיים, זוך ליבי יוסי יושבת בשלווה בירושלים, ורודעתי, ויעצור עדה עד חוק שמיים.
I want to briefly just highlight on page 93, if you look back, it's just a couple of lines that we just read. So in the first stanza, it talks about how did you not remember the covenant, Brit ben Haftarim. How do you pick the enemy and empower the enemy and not remember your commitment to us, your covenant with us, God? Then in the second line, it uses, the same theme, how could you get so angry? Give the arrogant power and not remember. And here, instead of just referring to covenant, it uses the word dilug dera. Okay, which means to skip, to hop, which is allusions to like phrases that you find in the Song of Songs. A lover that skips and hops. God, you forgot the lover, the joy, the dancing with your lover. And the third stanza refers to Lo zacharta bi'ud veset. Veset means the time. The period, you didn't remember. Again, these are, challenging Hebrew words. But the allusion, I want to just bring out, there's an allusion here to a relationship between God and Israel. Because Vesed is also between a husband and wife in terms of relations. That's a term. The period of intimacy. So God, you didn't remember the skipping and then joining. That's the dilug. God, you didn't remember the veset. That is the intimacy, the period of intimacy. And then in the next stanza, in 4, lo zacharta chitun. What's chitun? From the word chatuna. What's chatuna? Marriage. Chitun chukei chorev. You didn't remember the marriage of Chorev. What's Chorev? Sinai. So Sinai, the hope of Chorev means the laws of Sinai. But it's not just the laws. You didn't remember the love of Sinai, the marriage of Sinai. So, it begins with God. How did you pick the enemy, the arrogant, the impure enemy, the defiled enemy over us? But it shifts not just from the covenant to us, to our relationship with you. God, we are your lover. We are your beloved. We are the one that you consecrated a relationship with at Sinai. And even in the next stanza, Lo zacharta yikar yididut yosher. Also, yakar means dear, yidid means a friend, but a beloved. So it uses that language to try to characterize our relationship with God. Not just God, you committed to us in a legalistic sense, but we're your beloved. And then at the very end, it refers to Nishbinu Pa'amayim, that we've been Chevy captured twice, and the twice is referring to the first temple and the second temple. Of course, sadly, nowadays, when we think of Chevy, we think also of captives, of 115 captives in Gaza, who are still, sadly, it's not just 2 captives, or us being captives twice, it's 115 of us are captives to this day, and we think about them today. Page 94, it's another, this is the third one in a row, and then we'll skip a bit. Is another one by the Kalir. So a third in the row by the Kalir, and just look at that opening line of this one. Oh, that I might soar up to the vault of the heaven, that I might make the heaven share my dirge. Okay, in other words, this is cosmic. When Israel suffers, that's not just geopolitical, it's cosmic. It reverberates in the heavens. And if only I could, pierce the heavens and directly share in the convulsions in the heavens over what's going on to Israel when Israel suffers. That's the thrust of this on 94.
הדעת חוג שמיים, עליתי שמיים, האור יום מחריבי פעמיים, את אונן מי ייתן ראשי מים, אבחין בבכי ילל מדבר, אבחנה ליל מליל, ומדבר ממדבר, אבקה איתי עולת מדבר, אשאג מי יתנני במדבר, אגדה ואנשר כנוקב זית, אגרה איתי כמו בני בית, אגרום שלומר בעל הבית, ארשי מי יתנני שמיר בשית, אדווה בכל לב להמצאו, אדאג מילים בם להמצאו, אדאג רואה ולא אמצאהו, הכונן מי ייתן יגעתי ואמצאהו, אהבך ואדחפך, כאופן במילי, אגה פנים בפנים, לתנות עמלי.
Ahau eres
Press the button. We all hear anyway.
Okay,
Small.
continue, and then
Pretend
now
it's
just for the
others.
video.
ahau eres ובסהר מלהגיע למולי, אצרח מי ייתן אפו ויקטפון מילי, אורח משפטי גונבי אלי, הודיע בביצי ומעלי, אומללו מזלות בקראי מעילי, אפונה מי ייתן שומע לי, אסדה כעופרה האביונה, אזכרה מי הייתי מחותנה, אזיל פלגים כבריכה העליונה, אגור מי ייתן לי עבר כיונה, אך נפשע בקריית עוז אל צור, אחו בלי מים באף לעצור, אחז כמות לקצור, ועוללות לבצור, אשיחה מי יובילני עיר מצור, אתא אוהלי הפני בצל מוות, אטוסה ואשכונה עד חצר מוות, אטפל את המחכים למוות, אנהה מי גבר יחיה, ולא יראה מוות, היעדותי לעזרתי, תרתי לחזות, איומתי בכל שנה אומרת, היא השנה הזאת, הידע לכל כי מודעת זאת, אם מי לא ידע, יד אדוני עשתה זאת, אקוף לך ראש, אדוני חילי, אכרע לך ברך, לחתל מחלי, אך תרחה בשיר בשירי מחוללי, אכוון מי ייתן לך כאח לי, אל תשכח צעקת אריאל, אליו לגור יהודה וישראל, אלפי שנאן אשר מסר אל, לאמור, מי ייתן לציון ישועות ישראל, ישראל מאת בדרכי לא הלכו, עזבתי ועזבתי, ופניי מהם נהפכו, רגנתי והיללתי, ומאי בלבי נשכחו, איכה תפארתי, מראשותי השליכו.
Let's turn to 99. And 99 is another color, and now it shifts focus. The focus here is on priests. So destruction of temple, and with the temple's destruction, also the role of Kohanim. They don't have the same stature, even though today we know who our Kohanim are, and they give us Birkat Kohanim, and they get called up to the Torah first. So we honor the Kohanim, but obviously the key work for the Kohanim is not there to be done right now. Sadly, tragically, we don't have our temple. And the status of the Kohanim, they're still Kohanim, but they're missing their main function. So the focus now is, in this Kina, 99, is on the Kohanim. So that's the opening line, how does the Chavatzelet HaSharon, the rose of the Sharon, which is an allusion, I believe, to the priests, and then Damam Ron Mipi Nosei Aron. So I'll say this for Dr. Seaman because it refers to the sadness of the silence that we don't hear the song. We don't hear the song. Ron is, look here in English, song is muted on the lips. Damam is, dom is quiet. Ron, it can be like Roni, Ron can be, Rina can be joy, but it also can be rejoicing through song, and that's what it means here. So they've been silenced, those who groan, who rejoice us through song, by their mouths, and they are Nosei Aaron. They are the ones who carry the ark. That's, you see the beauty here. It doesn't say, the Levites can't sing. It doesn't say shir, it says ron. It just says just a little, it's hard in Hebrew. It doesn't say shtok, it says damam. Everything is done in a more beautiful language here. So damam for silence, ron for singing, P is the mouth, but instead of Levites, Nosei Aaron, the ark carriers. So, but we miss the priests in the temple. We miss the Levites and their songs. We miss all of that. That's what's lost when you lose a temple. You lose also the glory of the priesthood. And then you'll see here, and we'll read it in a second, but if you look here, I just want to show one other thing before we read it. On 99, if you look here on the right side, you'll see after each stanza in the Hebrew, you notice in parentheses, what do you see there in parentheses? These terms that maybe are a little unfamiliar. Yehoyarib, Yedaya, you see what I'm saying? Haram, Sheorim, Malkiah, and all in all, I think there are 24. Does anybody know what these are? These are names. 24 names of priestly families. According to tradition, there were 24 different watches, mishmarot, right? The mishmar. Mishmar means a watch, but a watch can mean also like an assignment, like you're on call. So in the temple, how did it work in the temple, right? There's nonstop work to do, and so who's on call? So priests are on call. What do you mean? All priests are always on your entire life, you're in the temple? So the way it worked was there were watches. There were 24 watches. All the priests were divided up into 24. And the 24 families, right? So they had names, extended families. The name is the Yehoyarib family, the Yadaya family, the Haram family. It's not just one family, but it's a division. 24 divisions. And each division then worked in the temple how long? You had 24 of them? About 2 weeks. So everybody, that's what happened in temple times. The priests were on call for 2 weeks a year. How exciting. They got to come to Jerusalem. They were on. It's a nice system, right? We could maybe, thank God our minutes been okay, but maybe we need watch systems also in synagogue and modern times where people are more on call, right? So that's how it worked in the temple. 2 weeks people were on, and we know their names. And by the way, this is amazing. I appreciate this more just the last few days where I read a little more about this. Also, a rabbi, I want to give him credit, but I'm blanking on his name, also talked a little bit about this. So that here is an amazing poem from the 6th century, because you see the Kalir knows all the names of the families. Now, why is that interesting? Because it's 500 years after a temple. And this shows the love, right? The love for Yiddishkeit. And what other, right? We often say things like this, but this is an amazing example of this. What other, who else can name which other religion or tradition knows who were the priests 500 years ago? who did the watches in the temple 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 years before? And you see the Kalir knows these traditions. And some of these names, from what I understand, we would only know this from this poem. Some are said in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and some in rabbinic literature, but not all 24. Here he has, I think, all the names. And they found, again, I have to double check the details, but we found inscriptions even in other synagogues, maybe even in Yemen. Later on, listed in the synagogue, the names of the ancient priestly families. So that's why, to this day, we treat our priests with the honor that we treat them, and our Levites have to take their assignment seriously, with the washing of the hands and all of that, because this is not just ancient, this is also our future. Okay, page 99, Echa, Eshva.
Echa Yashva, Chavatzel Tasharon, V'Tamar Rom, Yitinose Aron, V'Na'u Mishmarotam Kohanim B'nei Aaron, Kinim Sarah Bayis, V'Misra Revei Maron, B'Chov Sivkeh L'Chumeshet Sefarim, K'Nehera Kohen V'Navi B'Yom HaKippurim, V'Aldamo Nishchatu Parachim, K'Tzfirim V'Nadu K'Tziporim Kohanei Tziporim Golsa Me'artza Kala Mukushata Ba'avon Ma'asros Ushvita Uba'arba'as Shvatim Hushpata Umedya Hushata Mishmeres Mishpata Ba'avon Ma'asros Ushvita. What would that have been, Rabbi? That's just failing to bring Truma Maser.
Yeah,
okay.
very good.
Okay.
And failing to do the sabbatical cycle.
The same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yirmiyahu already talks about it. Jeremiah talks about that. They didn't, it's part of the sins, that they didn't have faith in giving the agricultural gift to the poor and letting the land lie fallow to open it up to everybody. They didn't stick to that, the covenant of the land also. And that's part of the reason for exile.
And so that's what led up to like divine, like Eches divine, things like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, connected. Exactly.
Darchei Heichal Domamu Kinefrat Choslo Bahama'il Kinikra Pesilo V'Husach V'Hushpal Mitilo V'na Mishsilo Kohen Ayasalo Hayu Mal'ivim B'Lochamei Lachem Faros Lo Ra'id Lachem U Mimayim Umilechem Kuvul Lo Shitei Halechem Mibeis Lachem.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very complicated allusions, but here you just catch some of it. They say that you didn't do Haros L'Ra'ev Lachem, you didn't give bread to the needy. You didn't give charity, you didn't support those in need. And then the result was not just, and because of that, they starved, Rabu, and they didn't have enough lechem, and therefore, therefore, in the temple, the ritual of the 2 loaves of Shavuos ceased. In other words, it's not just, there's the taking care of the poor, and there's the temple, the ritual. They're all interconnected. There's a whole ecosystem. And when we don't do our part to look out for those who are in need, then the temple is going to go bust. Okay, page 100.
Vayetze Hadar Om Bakesef Nechpas Usamuro Eferoja Chipas Neros Nichbu Menorah Nichpas Befashu Bolechem Ufas Nilchada Yochas Zachrazman Asher Nasa V'Nishma Heshivu V'ata Anos Amen Lo Avu La'ana V'Rosh Shuvu V'Ruvu V'Huksu V'Valu Kohanei Elavu.
Remember the time where you said Nasa v'Nishma, you responded loudly, Nasa v'Nishma at Sinai, we're in. But now, Ata, Anot amen lo avu. You don't even want to answer amen. And amen shows commitment. So sadly, there have been highs in Jewish spirituality, and sadly, there have been lows. Okay, Chet Chata.
חית חטא ואמרה לאליל זה אל, והיל איגה וסיס עשה בחוזה אל, עבור כן, הורגזה במרגיזי אל, ויצא ממעון אל כפר עוזיאל. תומסה החניפה סבל, ונעלה רב החובל, וענן אבק רגליו כאבל, ואין מסקרבל בכהני ארבל. ידו פורס צר בבייס זבול, כי חליה חויבתי כדור המבול, כסאו השיס לחיבול וניבול, ויצא בחבל כבול, כהן כבול. כל עמה כוננו קינה, כי הכניסו אל קנה, בגוי נבל עושם קינה, ונודעתה מקינה משמרס אל קנה. למה מרון עין ספס, וכסף על חרש חיפש, ובחיזוק מוסר פורפס, ונהרס ולפס כהן צפס. ממרון השפיע מיל עשי טעון, והיכני בעיוורון ובשיגעון, ופחד עלי עוונו וגבעון, ונאם ממעון משמרס פני מעון. נשקד עול עוון ונכאב, כהושבני ענונה מבלי אב, ודוממתי מיל צף במניין בוגב, ונשאה עלי קינה משמרס ישב באב.
Page 101.
Sila kol avirai more horia belonis karli akidas moria merod mered umeria utzaka eron veria mishmeres ma'adya agape forshim verichumanis verikol chereb chanis virbesi tzamos utanis umituras tafnis yatsa yivanis persha v'ein. Okay, so because of this, right, yatsa yivanis, that's why we had the Greeks who came and got to us also. Persha v'ein yad shaleach tilo hemina v'ashkem v'shaloach v'hushbasa baris melach v'ein shemen mamulach barosh mamlach tzadik v'anakiyu maras barvu aru al yisod ba ha'aras timur oziv zimra kinim alea necherat ubukavtei eretz nizrach mishmeres Nitzraz, Karasil Tsarai, Kolilo Arav, Konanti Bayar, Ba'arav, Chava, Ner Hakalek Marav, Reach Lo Arav, Malni, Achala Arav, Re'eki Hus Arti, Ka'aniya, Bataniya, Baniya, Badasika Tzalatev, Meduya, Na'a, Mechunya, Migdal, Nunya, Shamu, Ki His Mati, B'tzachana Safati Meni Techina Below Nasamli Rachamim B'chanina Umikriyastana Na'a Kfar Yochana Shamu Kiyatzasi Bashivya V'nisrafat Das Maron Shvuya V'ushati L'shama V'arbuya Meser Chamrira Balsa Beis Chovia Tzavoras Shamuni Hadamim Vishasu Shara Shamimim, Veshiv Aor Yamin, Babon Slamin, Na'a Kisan Talmin, Tavo Samriach, V'chot Shchi Tazriach, Kadesha Atzmo Tafriach, V'reach, Minchosenu Kikedem Toriach, Umishukha Ta'ariach, Shulei Hamas Ariach.
Okay, we turn now on next page. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
This kina we should just read is alphabetically.
Yeah.
And when did it start? When this type of kina? When this type of poetry started alphabetically? Is it possible to think?
Yeah, well, already she just points out that there's alphabet order, and that's actually in Eicha. The book in Eicha, in the first 4 chapters, They all follow the alphabet. In chapter 3 of Eicha, it actually has 3 lines for Aleph, 3 lines for Bet, 3 lines for Gimel. So it's a triple alphabetic. But we have this also in Tehillim. If you think of Ashrei, Ashrei follows an alphabet. So it's a very good point, but it's building on the Bible. And especially on the book of Eicha, which is relevant for today. Eicha is called Kinot, by the way, by the rabbi. So the paradigm for Kina is Eicha. It's actually a good segue because we're about to read about Yirmiyahu's Kina, the Konen Yirmiyahu, Al Yoshiyahu, that on page 102. But I still want to talk about the alphabet one more second, but let me just say that the Konen, when we get to 102, this is about Yirmiyahu, the great prophet, who's also, modern English to be a Jeremiah is to be a prophet of doom. And Jeremiah had a tough career. He had forecast all sorts of bad news, and he suffered a lot for it, right? That's the story of Jeremiah. People didn't want to hear it. And people didn't believe him. And there were false prophets who said, well, we all want to hear good news. But, as much as we're optimistic people, sometimes there are tough times that we have to deal with also. And sometimes there are no shortcuts. If you want better times, you have to follow God's path. So that was Jeremiah's job, to tell the people to improve their ways, or also just to be realistic that the temple is going to be destroyed and Babylon is going to destroy the Judean kingdom, and they're going to be exiled. And there isn't a quick solve, and there isn't a quick solution to that other than the hard work of repentance. So that's, in a brief, Jeremiah's difficult career, and, he was thrown in prison, and he had to run away to Egypt. I mean, he really had a difficult, at times a miserable life, trying to do his job and his calling. So that was, part of the heroism of Yirmiyahu and his career. So he also had this close relationship, although a bit of it, with parts to it also with a king who was righteous, Yoshiyahu. Yirmiyahu had to deal with Judean kings who were not good kings, who were morally problematic. But Yoshiyahu was the paradigm of a righteous king in the time of Yirmiyahu's life. So the story we're about to read talks about the Kina, and I'll get to that story in 1 second, but I want to get back to Tzvi's comment. But it says that Yoshiyahu died. We'll get to that in 1 second, what happened. And Yirmiyahu said a Kina. Yirmiyahu said an elegy. He lamented. He said a Kina upon the death of King Yoshiyahu. That's a verse in Divrei Hayamim at the very end of the Bible. Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu. So there's a Rashi that I've seen a bunch of people quote. Rashi on Divrei Hayamim, who says, what's the Vayikonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu? What Kina did he say? So Rashi says, he said Eicha. And actually, according to rabbinic tradition, we can be more specific. He said chapter 4 of Eicha. According to rabbinic tradition, Eicha has this interesting history. It's 5 chapters, but it actually was compiled in phases. The first 2 chapters of Eicha has a lot of, hey, how could you, God? A lot of the challenge to God. And then chapter 3, that's the first 2, a lot of anger. Chapter 3 is Ani HaGeber. Ani HaGeber, which is I am the man, which according to tradition is Yirmiyahu, saying, I'm the witness. And I'll testify, and part of what he's testifying is why Israel deserved, as much as Israel turns to God and says, how could you? Chapter 3 is turning Yirmiyahu saying, I'll be a witness, and this is deserved on some level, and God is righteous. That's chapter 3. So the first 2 chapters of Eicha are, in a sense, anger at God. Chapter 3 is Yirmiyahu testifying why God's ways are righteous and why, sadly, this is deserved. And then chapter 4, according to rabbinic tradition, is linked to the death of Yoshiyahu. I think in chapter 4 is the line of Ruach HaPenu Mashiach Hashem, which is an allusion to the Messiah, the exalted one. So the exalted one we think at the end of days, right? We're waiting for Mashiach. But there have also been anointed ones in our history, anointed ones, priests and kings, who have been anointed, who have been exalted people, who have been leaders, and one of those was Yoshiyahu. And so those are different keynotes. Just back to Tzvi's for a second. The Aleph Bet is a structure of lamenting. And the way I heard one, I saw read a friend of mine, Shira posted from a Bible scholar, I forget who, but I liked his explanation. He said that part of the power of Aleph Bet is the laments are very desperate, but Aleph Bet at least gives you some framework. It gives you some structure. And that even in all the desperation, we have some structure, some of our tradition and the framework to hold us together. That's the Aleph Bet. Just briefly about the Kina of Yirmiyahu through Yoshiyahu. So just like we moved from the destruction of the temple to the priesthood, now we talk about the figures who we lost, leaders who we lost. And that's the story over here that Yoshiyahu, he didn't just die, he was killed in battle. And the story is that you could read in the Book of Kings and in the Divrei Yamim that the Egyptians who were in the south, right, just like they are to this day, right, it's the same geopolitical setup. The Egyptians are to the south of Judah, and to the north are the Babylonians and the Syrians. And the Egyptians wanted to march through the land of Israel to battle the northern enemies. And Yoshiyahu did not want to give them passageway. And Yirmiyahu said, you're making a mistake. Let them pass through. They're our allies. Let them pass through the land of Judah in their march north. And Yoshiyahu seems to wanted to, engage in this diplomacy in the region and not be a conduit, a portal for the southern Egyptians marching north of their enemies. And he said no. And as a result, Yoshiyahu was caught up in a battle with the Egyptians himself. And in that battle, Yoshiyahu fell. So Yirmiyahu, you just noticed what happened here. Yirmiyahu told the king, you're making a mistake. The king didn't listen, even though he's a righteous king. He didn't listen to Yirmiyahu. He died in battle. And Yirmiyahu had the presence to still recognize his greatness, despite that he was, stubborn on the politics there and made a catastrophic error. Yirmiyahu still, of course, lamented him for all his greatness. And that is linked with Eicha chapter 4, and that is also linked with this Kina on page 102.
Which battle was that? Was that Megiddo?
Megiddo, exactly. That's the battle of Megiddo. Very good. Does anybody read or? Okay, so I'll do this one. But you can then Yoshiyahu on page 102. Oh. Page 102.
Eicha Eli Konanu Be'elav Ben Shmona Shana Eichel Medursho Be'elav Bneicham Avram Chanu Alav Lo Duskar Lo Sigui Mikalav Gabachol Hamlachim Asher Kamu Vigdur Lokam Kamohu Mimos Havidur Gabachol Avon Litzanu Hadur Asher Achal Hadelas Bahamazuza Samu Listor Haochlin Zara Shihor Kikmo Hato Pichamu Mishkor Vayigdal Avon Veheshiv Yamin Akor Vaod Lo Shalach Vado Min Hakor Zaku Amarav Kanam Das Lahakim Vitza Himraso Ba'arur Asher Lo Yakim Hashak Soaro Kinna Su Vichokim Viveta Lo Ase Das Lahukim Tovim Reim Nikru Kishalcho Malach Mali Balach Hayom Lital Ach Yidei Am Haaretz Damim B'Malach Teanes B'Vitz Estnei Pilach Kila Hamona Lalekas Aram Naharayim Leman Dosa Ur Era Kol Shuhu Be'Ephraim Lo Shama Lachozeh Lashub Achorayim Ki Gezerah Nigzerah Lechaseh Lechaseh Mitzrayim Mechatos Sisiras Mezuzos Chazod Antosi Hechelu Levasos Nao Anabim Lefumo Lehavzos Lo Hise Pana Besaftu Alzos Suro Heidu Adlo Sheia V'yima Anu Sur Umat Yisod Nishia Pnei Karab Kikarab V'lo Alsa Lo Sheia V'yoru Harpo Hayiri L'melech Yoshia Odenu Otzem Ena B'Gevyo Mochatzim Chetz Achar Chetz Morim V'Lochatzim Sadu V'Samuhu Kamat Hara L'Chitzim V'Yizrachu Mo Shlosh Meos Chitzim Kalim Pitu Acharab Azon Motza Pilu V'Ad Bitsui Nefesh Masa Hefihu Ruach Spasav Hifza Mipihu Sadeku Adonai Ki Marisi Pihu Sisi No Ki Kana Za'am L'Shalem Sha'onam L'Avod Bitzam Tam Kesem Hatov Amzu Bipasham V'Yikonen Alav Kol Echa Yuam Tam B'Mikra Echad Kos V'Gidui Lishtos B'Moed Shnas Hashvita Kiga Hakel Lesos Kala Esrim Ushayim Meharos Shasos Isaftu Lo Echa Esrim Ushayim Osios Osos Kidos Lubaka the Holy Eski Shachati the Cholali Zamoa Zamosi Ki Laad Yahahilu Rashtat Estasi Benutash Ahali.
Okay, let's turn to 109, another Kalir. And this one begins with the term over and over, a-ko, a-ko. So this is obviously a play on the word echa, but instead of vocalizing an echa, it says a-ko. So where? Where is the one who said that? So not how can you, how could you, that's echa, how could you, or how could it be? This is where is, it's missing the one who said that, and it's an allusion to Abraham and to Israel and to all, where is the one that did all these meritorious things? Where is the flourishing Jewish people? Where is, and you look just in the English, where is Abraham? Where is Jacob? Where is Moses? Where is, what happened to all their deeds? How come that didn't, act towards our merit to help us stave off the suffering of the destruction? Okay, page 109. Eko America la bepeta peribin atarimko yelanetza feina ata bulu ata vibratza lama lohim sanachta lanetza Eko gash kiselo la ratza techa Nachatko, Pitu Be'edetecha, so this is allusion to Isaac in the finding of Isaac. Vein Ata Dakru Tepelach Rayatecha, Yeshanach Chapetzon Maritecha. So where is the Isaac, the one who was willing to be sacrificed, and now instead there's the suffering and the torment of destruction. Third one, this allusion to Jacob, who was with the sheep. So then we're invoking the patriarchs, and we're saying, God, why did that not really stand up for us? Eiko, fourth one. Now this is referring to Moshe. Zam Barak Mitzri, the one who killed the Egyptian, began the Opa Kodesh, V'yifen Kovako. The Moshe looked right and left. Chotam Edut Kodesh, Ve'nata Chalkam Achal Kodesh, Kol Hara Oyeh Kodesh. Fifth one. Eiko, Tov, Kishlach Kol Avadecha. There's also an allusion, I think, to Moshe. Towards the bottom. This is now talking about the Israelites leaving Egypt and facing off with Pharaoh. Page 110. On the top. Eiko Mishma Moshe Allah, this is Moshe at Sinai. Kotomar Limbat Beit Baitamula, Vein Ata Niatsu Abnei Avla, Yibadak Medi Lamala. Eiko Siach Shishim Otiot Haktumot, Kotevachu Shishim Giborim Domot, this refers to the priests. The priestly blessing, Vein Ata Kuberdumot, Isvachet Kardumot. Eiko Patzlakov, Uberacham Kloshecha, B'shuv B'chot Tedaber Humar L'Kloshecha, Ve'hein Ata Tzaru Ele Kloshecha B'shuv B'Ishmi Emidashcha. Oh, the one who wanted to curse, but instead blessed. This is an allusion to Bilam. With the status of the Israelites during the time of Bilam, so worthy of blessing. Middle of the page. The Levites being consecrated. Towards the bottom. Is a reference to Jericho. Yoshua conquering Jericho. Eiko Shuat Asamayotzar, B'Chomar Asher Ladarot Natzar. So having the storehouse is filled. It's apparently allusion to the priest. And that's it. Okay. Let's skip now to page 123. So we're still with Kalir, and this is a keynote of contrast. God as opposed to us. And again, because we had some keynotes which were very, daring and angry, but now it's really the theme of Tziduk Hadin, that God is just, God is righteous, and we're lowly creatures who have a lot of shame. And we contrast God's exaltedness with our shame. Page 123.
The Hebrew seems a little easier.
And the Hebrew here is a drop easier, even though it's still the Kalir. It's true. About so. 123.
Oh, what'd you say?
Ulanu Moses Aponim, China Yitzrachnu, your son, the of the Cholad Retzaka, Begoy Maker of God, Hakam Masos, Ulanu Moses Aponim, Vidopi Ashim Sabanu, Masehem Masos, the Cholad Retzaka, Behold him with Ghost Lola, Ulanu Moses Aponim, Vayamru Al Yamsu, Vayamru Al Yamsu, get good, they all of the Pasha. Father, let's look up. The Zaythor of Yatsemigai, the Bani Elohim, Lonu Shaponim, the Horfenu the Sit, Kumasek Elohim, בכל הצדקה בטעם שהתעמתנו כצפיחס בדבש, ולא נבוש הפנים ביום שקרבנו לפניו סולס ושמן בדבש. בכל הצדקה בתיל קולמן ובערב אמרנן, ולא נבוש הפנים, ולחם הקולוקר ואפוסינו עליהם בגרוגנן. בכל הצדקה במדבור לא חסרנו דבר, ולא נבוש הפנים, ונעצוס ולבון בחצרות ביטהות מדבר. בכל הצדקה בסיכון ועוד, בכל מלכי חנן, ולא נבוש הפנים, יחון אשר מה בקרב ולמצוא מלן. בכל הצדקה בפועל אשר פעלת, 14 מושים, ולא נבוש הפנים, יצלם ניחא, כי בו אנחנו פושעים. בכל הצדקה בכיבוש שילה בנו בגבעון ובסלונים, ולא נבוש הפנים ברשע, שנמצאנו שחרבו, ובום אנו נחרבים. בכל אדוני הצדקה בשני חורבנות שחרבו במצאנו ואנו קיימים, ולא נבוש הפנים, ושובנו אליך בכל לב, שתשוב אלינו ברחמים. בכל הצדקה בשעת מאושנה, שעשה שנאת קדושה ולהישמע, ולא נבוש הפנים, יסבו איש חמודות, בשיבה עצי אלוהי זכה ושמעה.
It's almost like he's challenging God. He has to veil his language. He has to hedge his bets and be a little bit more couch the language in very dense syntax that you got to like cut through it.
Oh, you're trying to explain why in the other ones it was even harder Hebrew. And now
Yeah, but this is more straightforward. It's praising God.
That's great.
It's more straightforward.
It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. That when you're daring, you still have to do it in ways that are delicate. And here, where it's praising, so it could be more direct. I think that's a nice suggestion. Yeah.
Question. In general, how much is it our fault against versus your fault?
Yeah. I wish I knew the answer.
Is it half and half?
No, I don't think it's your fault meaning God's fault.
Yes.
No, I mean, I think the traditional answer is we could be upset, but it's not God's fault. We could just be shocked, and we could say, God, we have a cut. But we remind God that we're His children. We remind God we're beloved. We remind God that there's a covenant. But God's just, so it's not God's fault. We just say, God, we're humans, and we're vulnerable, and we're limited, and God, have compassion. But in terms of fault, it's more our fault, but it's not. But we say even despite our fault, God can remember our whole tradition. Remember that our name's engraved on your seats. So on page 125, we get to a famous Kina now. This is about this is known as Arzel Banon. And Arzel Banon is about the 10 martyrs, right? And this is a later, now we move from the Kalir. I think later on, still this morning, we might see the Kalir one more time. But for whatever reason, there is a certain order. I don't totally get it to the layout of the laments. But now we move to a medieval lament. But the medieval is the author, but the subject is the ancient rabbis. And it's the 10 martyrs during the Roman period. And it's described as if they all live in the, it sounds like they're all living simultaneously, but we know they didn't live exactly at the same time, different generations. But they all lived in the period under the Romans. We're talking about 1st, 2nd century CE or so. And they all died a martyr's death. And the 10 martyrs we also refer to when? Not just on Tisha B'Av, but on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. So this is a very rare example of an overlap between a theme that we talk about on, there are some links between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, but here's really a theme of a kina that comes up on Yom Kippur about the 10 martyrs. the way Rav Soloveitchik explained it, he said that even though they appear in both, their role is a little bit different. Their role on Yom Kippur, why do we invoke the 10 martyrs? Because we have a notion in our tradition, Yom Kippur is really all about atonement. And there are different, the main path to atonement is repentance. But there are other things we do to atone. We bring sacrifices to atone. So on Yom Kippur, we can't bring sacrifices, so we refer to the sacrifices that were brought. And we conjure up those sacrifices. So in our tradition also, when righteous people, tragically, when righteous people even die natural deaths, and certainly unnatural deaths, that's atoning. Tzadik mechaper, tat tzadik mechaper. So the death of, you can put it down, that's okay. The death of righteous atone. So that, Rav Soloveitchik said, that's the idea on Yom Kippur. While we refer to that, we're trying to use all the tools we can to get atonement. So we refer to some of the most saintly figures in our tradition who died martyr's death, and we said, God, on Yom Kippur, help us atone. Even in their merit, if not in our own. That's on Yom Kippur. On Tisha B'Av, the point is not about atoning. The point is about the tragedy. Tragedies in Jewish history. The tragedies when we lose our spiritual center, we lose our political and spiritual center. Jerusalem's destroyed, our temple's destroyed. There's tragedy when we lose the priests. And there's tragedies when we lose some of the great luminaries, the greatest sages of our tradition. And especially when we just lose them, but that they died in these horrific ways. And this is part of what we mourn also on this day. So that's our Zeh HaLvanon, page 125.
ארזי הלבנון, אדירי התורה, בעלי תריסים במשנה ובגמרא, גיבורי כוח עמלהו בטהרה, דמם נשפך ונשתה גברה. הינם קדושה היא הרוגי מלכות עשרה, ועל אלה אני בוכיה ואיני נגרע. זוז בזכרי אזעק במראה, חמדת ישראל כלי הקודש, נזר ועטרה. טורי לב קדושים מתו במיתה חמורה. ידעו גורל מראשון לחרף ברורה. כנפור גורל הרבן שמעון, פשט צווארו ובכה כנגזרה גזירה. לרבן שמעון חזר השר להורגו בנפש נצורה. מזרע ארון שר בבקשה לפקוד על בן הגבירה. נטל ראשו ונתנו על ארכובותיו מנורה הטהורה. שם עיניו על עיניו ופיהו על פיו באהבה גמורה. ענה ואמר פה המתגבר בתורה. פתאום נכנסה עליו מיטה משנה וחדורה. ציווה להפשיט את ראשו בתר הסחירה. קיים בדורו אמרו לנפשך סחי ונעבורה. רשע הפושט, עת הגיע במקום תפילין מצוות ברא. צעק צעקה ולהזדעזע עולם, וארץ התפוררה. מאחריו הביאו את רג עקיבא, עוקר הרים וטוחנן זו בזו בספרה, וסרקו את בשרו במסרק בזל והשתברה. יצתה נשפטו באחד, ובת קול אמרה, אשריך רג עקיבא, גופך טהור בכל מיני טהורה. בן בבא רב יהודה אחריו הביאו, בשברון לב והזכרה, נהרג בן 70 שנה בידי ארורה. יושב בתאריך היה, נקי וחסיד במלאכתו למהרה. רבי חנניה בן תרדיון אחריו, מתחיל תהילות בציון סוערה. יושב ודורש בספר תורה עמו, והגיפו בחבילי זמורה. את האור הציפו בהם, וקרחו בספר תורה. ספוגין של צמר הניחו על ליבו, שלא ימות במהרה. חסיד רבי ישובה הסופר, הרגו עם עמורה, זרקו ושלחו לכלבים, ולא הוגבר בקבורה. יצתה בת קול עליו, שלא הניח כלום בתורת משה לשומרה. ואחריו רבי חוצפית ביום עברה, עוף הפורח נשרף בהבל פיו, כמדים דורה. צדיק רבי אלעזר בן שמוע באחרונה, נהרג במדקרה, יום ערב שבת היה, זמן קידוש ויקדש ויקרא, חרב שלפו עליו, ולא הניחו בחיים לגומרה. יצתה נשמתו בברא אלוהים, בברא אלוהים. יוצר בצר צורה, כהנה וכהנה להוסיפו בני עוולה לענות בגערה, בסקילה, שרפה, הרג וחנק, מי יוכל לשערה? נותרת ממנה, יאכלו אריות שא פזורה. חזה התנופה ושוק התרומה, קרפו אריה והכפירה. יטיב אדוני ולא יוסיף עוד ויסרה, אמץ ברכיים כושלות, חלק יעקב ומושיע בצרה, לצדק ימלוך מלך, יאמר שלמו ימי אבלך, ולאורו נישא ונלך.
Okay, let's turn now to page 132. And now, on 132, we're again in medieval, early medieval. There's another well-known figure, Clonimus ben Yehuda. And this is the shift in our laments, because now the focus is not on ancient tragedies, but on medieval tragedies. And this and another one or two other ones that we'll see relate to Ashkenaz, France and Germany. It's mainly Germany actually over here, and the Crusades. You know, there were Crusades in 1096, and then in the middle of the 12th century, I think 1140. Terrible Crusades when the Christian Crusaders were marching to Jerusalem, and on their way, wreaking destruction on communities of Ashkenazi Jews, and here in Germany. And even though it's referring to Crusades, the opening is a verse from Yirmiyahu, from the Torah from today. Mi ten roshimayim ve'ini mekor nozlai, ve'efkeh kol yomotay ve'lai, chalei tapai v'olalai. You know, where I only a source of water, and then I would not stop be, the floods of tears. So just like Jeremiah cried, so too in medieval times, there was such terrible suffering and pain over the Crusades. And the Crusades in Ashkenaz, sometimes, there were killings, but some of the horrific aspects of the Crusades were that it wasn't just killings, there were periods where the Crusaders tried to force people to convert, and rather than convert, people martyred themselves and even committed suicide, and even collective suicide rather than betraying the faith and giving up our traditions to oppressive, coercive Christian crusaders who were trying to force Jews to betray their faith. So that's what's described over here in these different keynotes. There was one that we skipped over related to this, and this one, and you'll notice in it that it refers to it even gives us dates on page 133. We'll read it in a second, but it refers to Chodesh HaShlishi. It refers to the dates because we know when these things happen, and it refers, we'll see, Vermaisa refers to the different communities. Worms, Vermaisa's worms, Mainz, Speyer, they're referred to in these keynotes where the suffering happened, the terrible suffering happened. Okay, there's one other line in this, then we get to it, we could talk about that. One other line in particular I want to highlight, but on page 132. Mi ten roshimayim ve'ini mekor nozlai, ve'efkeh kol yomotay ve'lalai, chalei tapai v'olalai, v'sisei kahalai, Atem einu oy v'voy v'alalai v'chu b'chet rav v'hereg, al b'yisrael v'alam Adonai v'chu b'chareg. Damoti ma'ini melchali stevofim, makayim marela ma'anubim, abetulot hayifot, v'yeladim harakim, v'sifrehem nichrafim v'lotemach nimshachim, terrible descriptions of slaughtered children, anhu etzem v'pinim saprim v'nafachim, v'otif kutzot v'pinem nishim v'nishachim, srutamek harulam melech hareh, v'beit Yisrael ba'alam Adonai, kinaflu b'chareh, towards the bottom. Teredin Kima, Velami Mamuda, with people of Gorsak, Pralaspida, Ipazi Karamazav Kamuda, Kudak Kima, Kvod, Kol Plechem, Daritia Kruash, Lav Kamuda, a Torah, a Mikra, a Mishnah, a Gada. So it's not just the loss of life and the loss of all this Torah knowledge. 2 lines in the bottom. Einu Kamenu Zola Agida, Ein Torah, Talmida Alumda, Lo Makom, Ein Yosef, Karev, Beisav, Alam Adonai. Inaflu, Vafar, top of 133, Vafapayis Lumayim, Demal Hakira, Vakonemar al Haroge Ashpira, that's fire. Vasheni, Vashmonabo, so we know when it happened exactly, the 8th day of the 2nd month. Okay, so we're talking about ER, 8th day of ER. Yom Argoa Hukura, Margoa Lorana Kabula Birana, Gubachrechanan, Nisisehadura, Nisuyach, and Absham Nishtimura, Aichut Shema Nichad, Nichad Kukura, Giborka Koach, Separol Mera, Onev Almani Dvau Kulam, Asara, Beisrael Almanai, Naflubachar. Middle of 133. V'mar Yigonem Atzviyah Lachura, Kilada Kachar Gdama Yom Besachra, Kahal Vermaizel, V'chuna Bachura, worms, Yonei Eretz, so there were 2 different dates. So in the midst of the celebration, it turned into tragedy. Second half towards the bottom. That's Mainz. The German medieval town of Mainz, Saturab. Nishirim Kalu, Marayola, Gabra, Shlimon Hasham, Yichud Sheman, the Rabba, Lem Zakat Shever, Zakat Nefesh Mara, Shnei Mikdashai, Sedam Gayamura, Bakabab Madi Dashem Rushet, Rabba Yisrael, Amad Naikan, Bachar. Bachodesh Hashlishi, Bashlishi, no Safada, Mera, Chodesh Shana, Pakle, Agamutara, Biyom Atandat, Sibarti, Vitashra, it's Shavuos time. The day of giving up the law, where I was supposed to be happy, B'yom Netinata, Mochen Az Chazara, when the Torah was given, so it was taken back through the terrible tragedies. Alta Lala Maram Komadora, the Torah ascended, as it were, into heaven, because down here on earth it was bloodshed. You take out another Kabbalah Shabbat Lamdea, Shenev Sham Mogaora, Abeit Shavala Madanai, 134. Simunal of a family sped Marla Kashra, Kishkula, Regatam Tabella Tapra, Sepape de Leno Lambabira, Hieno Sif Moed, Sheve Betai, Nera, Vengu, Dizlatila, I just want to pause on that line. It says, don't add a time period to mark destruction. And that, again, especially Rabbi Soloveitchik would emphasize this line, but it's already here in the poem. And the line is saying that in Jewish tradition, we have one day on our calendar that is really the focus of all Jewish tragedies. Ein lo sif moed, right? There are too many Jewish tragedies, so we would start to mark every single day. Here we know the dates. We know the dates of Worms, Mainz, and Speyer when the Crusades happened, but we don't mark those tragedies on the dates they happened. We mark all of them on Tisha B'Av. And that's why on this day we have in mind all the tragedies. Ein lo sif moed. Tisha B'Av is called a moed. Moed usually means a happy day, but moed means a designated day. And Rav Rosenzweig often emphasizes this. It's a designated day. Now it's a designated day that we fill in with all the Jewish tragedies. And then, please God, when redemption comes, the day will be transformed to a day of consolation and celebration. And it's not the time to elaborate, but there was a big debate in Israel about, and among rabbis, what do you do with Holocaust Memorial? And should Holocaust Memorial be its own day? Yom HaShoah, there's International Holocaust Day, or should it all be on Tisha B'Av, maybe that's Rabbi David, different opinions. And Menachem Begin actually talked about this with Rabbi Soloveitchik. They talked over about this topic. And Rabbi Soloveitchik's opinion was that in Judaism, the traditional way is everything is marked on Tisha B'Av. Obviously, another position prevailed, but on Tisha B'Av, we also have in mind all the tragedies, even if we have a separate Yom HaShoah, because Shoah is so, just immense, the proportions, so we have a separate day ultimately, but we also think about all the tragedies, including, of course, the Holocaust. They say when the Rav would read the keynote, that even when he was talking about Rome, he talked about the Holocaust. When he talked about the Crusades, he talked about the Holocaust. Everything was through the prism of the Holocaust. And, that's, I think, true for many in our congregation as well. Let's keep going on. On page 134, about 7 lines in. Eli Beliak Kulan Hamot, Yesh Machol Machavil Lamot, Mutz the Shekal Cherem, Machadrim Mot, Chalalai, Lili Cherem, Mutalim Arumim Arumot, Ivatam Chal Chayat Eretz Lemot, Yonek Ish Seva Lamim Lamot. So there's so much tragedy around there. So we have to lament, call out to all the lamenters. Baby Shabbat Night, Matatim B'Mo Monai, Mabim Klimot. So we tell to God, restore the souls of the deceased. Tema biyatza b'sar mitgorer, achlani hamamana, atzar atzarer shivar, atzmotai zarer mitgorer, silakol abra dabur mashorer, yithriyam azar ein zarer, makati anusha ein matil zarer, akei amarti shu meni amarer, ufidi mati ala chayad zarer, abei yisrael alam Adonai, inalu b'charer. Okay. We continue on page 135. 135, that's what we're up to over here. And it's back to the Kalir. Azba Haloch Yirmiyahu. 135. So this is going back, and this is Yirmiyahu. I'll just say very quickly outside what this is about. This is the Kina. One more second. This is based on a midrash, very famous midrash. Midrash is brought down in Eicha Rabbah. The midrash says that Yirmiyahu, we said he was very tough and harsh, but he had this love for Israel. And according to the midrash, he could not handle what he saw was the fate of Israel, with their destiny, Judah. That they're going to be destroyed by the Babylonians, the temple, they're going to be exiled. So he went to the ancestors, and he went to visit Abraham, and we went to visit Yitzchak, and he went to visit Yaakov to their cemeteries. Right? Just like today, we could go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's cemetery, or I went to the Vilna Gaon's grave. So when I was in Vilna last summer, so you could go to graves of tzaddikim. So he went to the great tzaddikim, to Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, and he also went to the matriarchs. And he said, do something. Pray to God. Intercede. Pray to the Almighty. Tell God that God needs to have compassion, that there's a covenant. Now in the Midrash, remember who ultimately God listens to? God only listens to Rachel. Very, very powerful Midrash. And that's why Jeremiah refers to Rachel, that Rachel cries for her children. Rachel was buried, right? Where's Rachel buried? No, not in Martyrdom, but in Beit Lechem. Separate burial on the road out to diaspora and on the road back. Rachel, Derech Ephrata, on the road. So she's on the road because she's there watching and waiting for our return. And she's the one who tears, according to the Midrash, because she also is, not just she had her, competition with her sister, she also prioritized her sister. And her sister got married first, and according to the Midrash, she enabled her sister to get married first. So she was the one, because of the Midrash, I believe the Midrash focuses on that, because she had Rahmanut, she had great compassion on her sister, even with her competition. She had great compassion, so God says, I'm going to listen to her tears most. In the version over here, on 135, it's a collective effort. It's not just Rachel, it's everybody. God ultimately is swayed by Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moshe, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and even Bilhah and Zilpah. They're all mentioned here. They all come up, and God says, based on all of them, not that there won't be destruction, but ultimately that God will have compassion. That's on page 130.
Az Bahalo, Yuriyahu, Al Kibre, Avos, Nam Atsalos, Tabibos, Ma'atem Shopos.
What are you lying there, bones? Do something.
Dechem Galgu, Ubatehem, Charebos, Yezachus Avos, Be'eretz Taluvos.
Invoke your merits.
Gal Kulam, Bakinim, Al Chesrod, Banim, Dobavu, Bekol Tachanunim, Ne Shochem Ma'onim, Vaye Tachas, Zacharti Lehem, Bris Rishonim, Heim Hemiru, Kavodi, the soul, below Pachadu, below Rahu, Valim, Einai, Behem, below Nahu, below Shahu, Ve'ech Esapat, Al Amiras, below Za'ak Ab Hamon, Ba'avuram, V'chinen, Pnei El Ram, Chinan, Nesusi, Eser, V'chinos, Avuram, V'hin, Chazisi, Shivram, Vaye Havtachas Al Tiram Avram.
According to the Midrash, Abraham screams again, it's very brazen. He says, you put me through 10 tests. Was it all for naught? You promised me that you will give us progeny. God, remember your covenant. Tau
Lahoros, Ba'avodos, Zaros, Yatsu, Lachso, Oros, Nish, Baros, Eich, Esapa, Al Bitul, Aseres, Hakibros, Kod Savach, Yitzchak, Pnei Shochen, Shachas, Lashab, Bi Tevach, Huchach, Behin, Zari, Nishchak, Nimchat, Vaye, Tachas, Ve'es, Brisi, Hakim, Es, Yitzchak, Maru, Biyurbiyahu, Timu, Har, Hamoria, Neilisi, Niso, Iya, Ola, Li, Minishia, Ve'ech, Esapak, Haridas, Zacharia, Sach, Yulad, Betelech, Dumaos, Kitanen, Zolef, Ola, Lai, Shekti, Pachti, Be'elef, Ech, Gazu, Meni, Bechalef, Ve'ech, Hafra, Mini, Damim,
What's right?
Kama, Aleph, Pach, Roe, Neaman, Kafus, Be'efer, Umud, Man, Son, Asher, Rike, Haaman, Ve'ech, Gazu, Below Zaman, Vaye, Havtachas, Kilo, Haman, Kol, Befi, Leah, Mito, Fechfes, Al Levaveha, Rachel Achusa, Mivaka, Al Paneha, Zilpa Maka Paneha, Bilha Mikonenes, Bishte Yadeha, Shubo Timinu, Lumenucha Sem, Male, Hamale, Kol Mishalo, Seichem, Shulachti, Vela Lemanchem, Hineni, Mishobe, Galus, Venechem.
I think at the very end, at the very end, God joins in. God says, I was shulachti bavela lamchem. God says, I was sent out to exile because of you. Right? This is the tradition that God also is with us in our distress, in our plight, and also in our exile. And God says, I hear all the prayers. I was sent out, and I will bring back the exiles. And amazing, we live in the era where God brings back the exiles, right? 7 million plus living in the land of Israel. Page 144. Okay, we only have about 4 or 5 more. 144. So this is one that is a contrast. The Tzeiti Mitzrayim and the Tzeiti Yerushalayim. And this is part of the Jewish story, the highs and the lows. And we know our potential. And that's what makes the lows so painful. How glorious we were when we left Egypt. And how lowly we were when we left Jerusalem. And right, we were riding on high when we left Egypt. And we were broken when we left Jerusalem. And that's what this Kinah paints, this contrast between the highs of leaving Egypt and the lows of leaving Jerusalem. 144.
Ishtuka bikirbi, bhalosia libi, says in Mitzrayim, Kinan al-Ira, Leman askira, O Yishimoshe, Shir Loni Inoshe, the says, by Koniria, in a whole here, Basis Kunan, Bishofan Helman, Bahamasel Shofana, or like Hanana. Galayim Homu, Bachamo Kamu, Donim Shatofu, Yabroshi Tzafu, God Shemai, Bitsuriya Zu, Mayim, Lana Basamurim, Umayim Hamorim, Hashkim Harim, Shigos Harforei, Oriel Abel, Al Haros Babel, Umareki Adonai Kish, Ofelas Fanai, Bechem Natusha, Etzebech Natusha, Zebech Mincha, Beshem Mishka, Suglasil Likucha, Katson Latifka, Hagibush Bishapasos, Mosim Blosos, Tan Israel, Rudolf Havel, Togo Holim, Larabot Golim, Ohale Ishmaelim, Machalos Arelim, Yobel Shkita, Bier Shokita, Machulas Misus, Bechorus Bechrisut. Kaporas Bilon, Bialme Zikoron, Bialme Hakela, Uchleha Bola, the BMD Aharonim, Yeshib Zakaye, no Simonim, Umocholim Bekonim, Moshe Ilenu, Baal Yakinu, Uberansa Tipsa, Beazianus Kisar, Naroch Milchama, Badonai Shama, Rocham Menu, Hide Inenu, Sisrael Roches, Sisrael Roches, Emon Taras, Velai Sochoches, Olos Wakim, Vishin Chachim, Vichutsos Medukarim, Ubrexion Haikorim, Parenik Baos, the Chabot Baos, Shmikos Usros, Bikolos Usvaos, Sitz Hazaho, Bahamshil Beroho, Ushlach Hanezer, Bafas Haezer, Kidusho Uluo, Ufuradnoi Duro, Digo Allah, Ura, Ura Hatuma, Mina Mishua, Bahatusros Hatura, Zakas Olo, Benakas Olo, Shulchan Menorah, B'cholil Torah, Yelu Soipo, Pesach U'Matziva, Torah Suda, B'Seida Havoda, Sosonus B'Simcha, Rasidon B'Alacha, Yeshuvi, B'Yerushalayim.
Ultimately, the consolation of the great joy we will experience, and we start to experience in our own lives as we return to Jerusalem. Okay, we return now to page 152. Is already shifting now. Again, there's a certain order, but obviously moves around a little bit. In other words, we were in the ancient, then we got to the Crusades, and we actually went to some things that go back to earlier periods. Now we just read the contrast between leaving Egypt and leaving Jerusalem. And continuing now on the theme of Jerusalem, we have a very famous poem by Yehuda Halevi, a very famous poet. Yehuda Halevi, of course, is the great 11th century, 12th century Spanish philosopher and poet and spiritual giant, who was a great, great lover of Zion. And he has that very famous line that even if I'm in the West, my heart is in the East. And that wherever I am, my heart's in Israel. And in his philosophical book, the Kuzari, this is a very famous work of Jewish thought, of Jewish philosophy, the dialogue. Just like Plato wrote dialogues, so too that was a form of writing. So in medieval times, there's this great dialogue written by Yehuda Halevi that imitates this style of dialogue that he writes in Judeo-Arabic. And the dialogue is between the king and different interlocutors, the king of the Kuzarim, of the Khazars. The Khazars really were people who lived in the Carpathian Mountains, who apparently did convert. This happened, 8th, 9th century, and building on the history of that, but a bit of a mythic history, just taking sort of the legend, even though there's the historical kernel. He wrote this work, Kuzari, in the 11th, 12th century, describing a king of the Khazars who's a searcher, and he realizes that his life and the life of his people is not going down the right path. And there's more meaning, and he's in a search for meaning. So he summons different people to ask them about their traditions. So he goes to Muslims, and he goes to a Muslim, and he goes to a Christian, and then he goes to a philosopher, and only at the very end he says, okay, there's these lowly Jews, let's hear what they have to say. And he invites the Chaver, in Hebrew it's referred to as the Chaver. Chaver means a friend, but also means somebody who is knowledgeable. And he invites the knowledgeable Jew to his court to ask him questions about Judaism. And over the course of the conversation, he's so enthralled and amazed by the wisdom and the brilliance and the tradition and the faithfulness of Judaism that actually the Kuzari's 5 parts, after the end of part 1, the king converts. And very powerfully, the king converts and says, okay, now let's study. Not converting and I'm done, right? Sometimes today in conversion processes, you study and you convert. But the truth is that's the beginning of studying, right? And in Judaism, our whole life is studying. I hope this morning we're doing a little studying also to try to understand what a profound and amazing tradition we have with a lot of suffering, but a lot of spiritual strength that we've overcome so much. So he also, after he converts, then for 4 more parts, he studies more about Judaism. There's a very, very poignant part of the Kuzari where the king, again, they're living in Khazar, wherever, even mythically, Yehuda Levi is writing this in Spain, but he's imagining being in Khazar. And the king turns to the knowledgeable Jew, who's his teacher and his Rebbe, and then after converting also his Rebbe, and he says, but why don't you all live in Israel? Why do you choose to live here? Don't you have a homeland? Why are you living throughout, dispersed throughout the world? And Yehuda Levi, he's in Spain, and there's strong Jewish community in the north of Spain and the south of Spain, but Yehuda Levi is willing to, through the character, sort of ask the question to all of them, why are we here? Why are we not home? And a very famous part of the Kuzari Yehuda Levi, through the voice of, right, he's basically both voices. He's the voice of the king, and he's the voice of the sage. And the sage responds to the king, and it's Yehuda Levi also responding in Hebrew. He says, "Achein matzata makom herpati." You've touched on my point of shame. I don't have a good answer for you. There's no good answer why we all don't live home, in our home. We have a home. Why don't we live in our home? And Yehuda Levi, I think that question bothered him so much that at the end of his life, he went home. The different legends, what happened, according to one legend, I think there's debate, I think the scholars think this really did happen, that shortly after he got there, he died tragically in the land of Israel. Trampled in the land of Israel when he got there. Which captures some of the sacrifice also of trying to return home. In this poem, he talks about Zion, and it's almost visceral. Zion for him is living and breathing and pulsating. And he's, Zion, why are you not demanding back everybody? Right? The question is why we don't all live there in Zion. You too, wake up and demand back your children. And cry out for your children. That's the poem over here. Tzion Halot Tishali on page 152. Tzion Halot Tishali L'Shlom Asirayich Yoshesh Shlomech Ve'en Yeter Adarayich Yam Mizrach Mitzafon V'Teiman Shlom Rachok Karov Si Mikol Adarayich. Go call out for all of those who've been dispersed. U'Shlom Asir Tikvan Noten Ma'af Ketal Chamon V'Savler Edam Al Adarayich. יפקוד עינותיך ניתנים, ואת החלום שיבת שבתך, אני כינור לשבת לפי לבית אל, לפניה מאוד יאמר למחניים כמו פיקט הרעיה. שם השכינה שכן עליו, ויוצרך פתח למול שערי שחק שעריה, כבוד אדוני לבד היה מעורב, אין שמש בשר וכוכבים ביריה, אבחר לנפשי להשתפך במקום אשר רוח אלוהים שפוכה בחיריה. Halfway down, עד בית מלוכה, עד כיסא אדוני, you're the center of the kingdom. You're the seat of God. How you foreigners, slaves, they're sitting in your seat. If only I could grow wings to gather back those who dispersed. Have a nice pause. If I want to fall down on your stones, I want to be in your dust, right? The Talmud tells us even Maimonides tells us the great sages would roll in the dust of the land of Israel. 4 lines on the bottom. אף קיבלו בי עלי כיפות אבותיי ושתומם בחברון מעלי מבחר כפריי. אבוא בירוק במלאק ועמוד בגדודה ושמל הר visit Hebron. הר הברים בהר ההר אשר שם שני הורים גדולים נערייך ומורייך. וידש מאוד אדיר אצל ימר דבור הפקד לפרח ונופת סוף נעורייך. ינם לנפשי הלו. Turning the page to 153. Aram Bechef, Alech Arbot Shmama Shar Yuvi, right? You can come our nefesh and ignaz and come from Bayit, Sheshachnu Chladrecha, right? It refers to the temple that was hidden away. Agos Ashit Beredis, Vivekam Sman, Chalab Eretz, Nahan Zeraya. Echa Robni Achoshto, Betach Zek, it's a book of Laments, right? Oh, Ech Maor Yom, Yil Matok Lenai. God, I read the fear of the great Shrek, and it's too much for him, all the images of Jerusalem desolate. Kosei Bonim, Atar Pima, Ikvar Maluk Salayim, Nefshlim, Mariah. Edeskara Alash, Stefan Marak, Leskara Livav, etc. Mariah. Middle, it's young, like Yofi, Zion, the most beautiful of cities. Ava B'chentik Shrimaz. ובך יקשרו נפשות חברייך, הם השמחים לשלוותך, כואבים השם ומתייך, ואוכלים השם רייך. יבור שפי שאופים נגדך ושתקדים איש במקומו, אבל עליהם נפח שערייך. אדוהם הנפש הגלו והתפסים מהר לקרוא והזכות בדורייך, המסכים שלייך, ונצים לעלות, לבוש בסנסינית מרייך. 7 lines in the bottom. שינר, לתרוס היה רוב וגדול, ואם הם פלם, ידמו לתמייך ברייך. על מי ידמו משקייך, ועל מי נביאייך, ועל מי לביאך, Sarai, who could be compared to the anointed ones, the prophets, the Levites, those who sing of Jerusalem? The Dovador Nisi, right? Ivech Moshav Elohayich. I waited, I so want that this should be this dwelling place of God. Happy are those who get to dwell in Jerusalem. Hashem mechakeh, yagia, bireh, alot oreh, yivku alav shkarayeh, yirot b'tovat, b'churayeh, v'la'aloz b'simpatech, b'shuveh, eli kadmat norayeh. Okay, we're nearing the end here. 161. Okay, this is going back to Ashkenaz, and this is the burning of the Talmud in Paris in 1240. We have a kinah here from the mayor of Rothenburg. We quoted at the very beginning, Rabbeinu Asher. Remember I said he moved from Germany to sing. His Rebbe was Rabbeinu Meir, the Maharam. And the Maharam lived in Ashkenaz, in Germany, in Rothenburg. I was there. I went to visit this town. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. And he was imprisoned, and he died in prison in 1298. These were the conditions of Jewish life in Germany, especially towards the end. And that was really the end of Germany as a real center. And he witnessed, I believe he witnessed firsthand, the burning of the Talmud in Paris. It says here he died 1293. Mordechai died 1298. Okay, but around that. But in 1240, the Talmud was burned in Paris. Just one thing you have to understand, and I appreciate this a little reading. It sounds bad, burning the Talmud. It sounds symbolic. It wasn't just symbolic. There were 24 wagons of Jewish manuscripts that were burnt in Paris. You have to understand, this is before the printing press, right? Printing press, 15th century, right? 16th century, that's the period of printing. In the 13th century, everything is handwritten. To the extent you have books, not so many books, and to the extent you have handwritten manuscripts. Today, we have some of these manuscripts. We know, right? There's some amazing collections. The Lunzer collection, the one that was sold at Sotheby's. It has some ancient Jewish manuscripts. when you have a manuscript of the Talmud that's so precious. Today we have only one complete manuscript of the entire Babylonian Talmud. There's only one complete manuscript that survived. It's known, actually, it's a little bit odd name if you haven't heard of it. It's the Munich manuscript. And the reason it's called the Munich manuscript is because in the state library, the municipal library, I guess the city library, but the official library in Munich is because we're talking about Jews living in Germany, they have that manuscript. And so that's the only complete manuscript of the Talmud that exists today, in the year 2020. So in medieval times, there were obviously many more manuscripts, but taking 24 wagons of Jewish manuscripts and burning them in Paris is basically trying to end Judaism. It's trying to take the entire Jewish library, not just a copy of every book, the only copy, and destroying it. That's what the burning of the Talmud was. That's what the burning of 24 wagons was. So when we're talking about a lament, sometimes we think, I don't know, a lament of people, when cities, when centers are destroyed, if we lose our traditions, that is our lifeblood. That's our soul. And that's really the miracle. Rav Soloveitchik also talks about this a lot, that he says German Jewry was destroyed, and amazingly, somehow the Jews, even in Ashkenaz, migrated to France. When Rashi was a kid, Rashi was born in France, but there were no good rabbis in France. He had to go to Germany. Rashi had to go to Germany to find a good rabbi. Rashi was talented. He was probably a wunderkind. So they sent him to Germany to study with rabbis. By the time Rashi matured and became an adult, he brought back that Torah to France, and he established the Shivot in France. Right? So Rashi in his youth had to go to Worms. But Rashi later in life, the center of the Ashkenazic Jewry shifted from Germany to France, and in Germany, that's where the Crusades happened. And that's part of the miracle of the providence of Jewish history. That as much as there was suffering, somehow the Torah, even burning in Paris, 24 wagons burnt of manuscripts, but somehow there was such love and devotion to Torah that centers shifted. The Jews found their ways from Germany to France. And when France was no longer the place, in 1306, Jews were kicked out of France, so they went to other places. By the 16th century, they found their ways to Poland. They got kicked out of Spain, they went to Portugal. They got kicked out of Portugal, they went to Italy. Italy, from there they went to Morocco. They went to Constantinople. Some of them went to Tzfat and onward. The Jews always found ways to migrate, but what they brought with them was their traditions, their Torah, not just preserving, but generating, creating, developing the Torah. And that's really part of the miraculous story of Jewish survival. Okay, page 161.
Shali Sruvo Beach, the Shwona, but Aveloyev, Amis Avim, the Shirhon Barasa, Zuloyev, Ashwafim, Fareret, Bakonima, Mishtomim, Alimoki, Agibilayev, Ulfim Kashim, Noga, the Kohulorio, Alayhem, Ishizrakuloyev, Shlomenosh, Nenoch, Pokevel, Mishpor, Tomit Bikone, Alay Kabaloyev, Yisoni, Isani, Uvenosyan, by Gronis Pate Mar Bikoloyev, Echon, Sunabi, Shokola, to Kal, Beach Posor, Lonithu, Zorin, Migalai, Mikaloyev, An Adina, Tihi, Shokna, Rohashke, Ufrefer of Kaihalo, Fossil Kaloyev, Hishviro, Gabo, Spok Pineo, the Fall Bispotin, Usabi, Bifliloyev, O Tigzri, the Stroke Lost, Eight, Bifukim, Lochena, Shrei, Shalalach, Gibloyev, Suri, the Lapit, the Eight, Alababur, said the Soneth, Kiviatis, like Eight, Bishuloyev, Sidai, Halotin, the Fall, Karabim, Umaast, the Glodim, the Rafti, Goloyev, the Oslo face, the Dust, Isima 8, the Seve, the Kugo, יהי נפשו ושולח, מושל מלך אשר בכל משתנו, סופו שיבה פינת במילויו, תחס מאיל, תזכס סיני ומושך בשר, תרתל לבוש על מוטוס, תחלוס במילויו, אורי דמעות עמי יהיו כנחל, יגיעו לקברו שני סורי אצילויו, משה יערום בהורהר, ושאל האיש תורה חדשה, וכנס מוגילויו, חודש שלישי, והוקשר קורביני להשריס כמתוסי בכל דופי יחדילויו, הודע ללוחוס ביום שירה בימי נקבתו, וסרוק וישדס, אז זה סשלית לבילויו, אסמן נפשי, יחדיריו לחיכית החול, אחרי רעוסי אשר אספו של אלוהיו, אלצוך לבלבון כנידחס, ושרפו שלב עליון, אשתמאס לבוקי אלוהיו, לא עדו סודרך סלולויו, היו אפילוס לסיד יוש בסילויו, יוקצח לפי נדבך, למסור למשקת מעוז, ולרגלי היוס קבול בקבלויו, ירב עיניו, שאול עיניו בדמעי, עד אלו, לכל מחוזת תכנף מאלוהיו, אף יחרבו ולטוב על לחיי עבור כי נחברו רחמי לטוב באלוהיו, לא כך סרור כספו, הולך בדרך ונרחוב באימו, הלא נוסף אלוהיו, ואני כשלחו להם בגלמוד, ושרתי לבדיהם, כסורם ראש הר בגלויו, לא אשמעו לכל סורי וסורוס, אבל כי נתקו בסדרי סופי חלילויו, אל בת אסחס פרוסה למתינים מאוד יוקרו, עצמו כל ילביו נפשו חלילויו, אסמה מאוד על מאור היום, אשזרח אל כל, אבל יחשך אלי מאלוהיו, זכי בכל מר רצור, על שפרונך מאלכו ועודייך, ולו יזכור אהבת גלויו, כגרי לבוש סע עלי העברו, אשר יוצאות ולחלי, וספסו אסתודולויך, כי מוז אנוסף לנחמך צור, יושיב שלוש שבטי שורון, יוריד אשתפולויך, או תעדי ועדי שוני, בסוף תחתי, תלתי במחו וצעתי במחולויך, דרום לבבי, ויסתויר בלכו צור, ויגיע לחשכך, ויודירו אפלויך.
Okay, just everybody who's here can just stick around. We're going to do about 5 more minutes, but we want to make sure that we can wrap up the proper way. So Travis, please stick around. Page 173. So we'll, basically this is what I want to try to do. I want to try to, 173 is about the Holocaust. So to say it briefly, that we know, of course, we were talking about before that this really is a day of all Jewish suffering, a moed, a day dedicated to all the collective Jewish suffering. And obviously in the 20th century, we experienced suffering of a different order. And there were various keynote that were written by the Baba, Schwab, Baba Rebbe, Schwab, different ones. And one of them is the one here. So let's read this one on 171. Did anybody not read that wants to read? See if I can move. 171.
72.
Oh, 170. Oh, sorry. What did I say? 173. 173. 173.
איכה תפארתנו מארשנו השלכת, איכה פניך ממנו הסתרת, איכה קצבת ולא חמלת, ולב נשבר ונתקה ביום צום והצערה. באנו לפניך לספות ולבכות בקינה ובגללה, בזכרנו את קדושי השואה כקצת חדשה. יון יעקב אשר אהבת ושיברת, גדלת רמי הקומה והגבוהים נשברת. גפננו לשמר ותנתנו לכספה שמת, דפקו עצמנו לאורנו ובשרנו, דחות דחית לארץ חיינו, דלפה מתוגה והנחה נפשנו, הנאבים בנינים, הישרים בתמימים, ותמרו בקרונות ככבשים ובקרים, החום מחנק והפתחים חדומים, ותקים יושבים על הארץ דוממים, ומאי כחטאתם הם שואלים, ולמה נגזרתם בלי רחמים? זכור תזכור את צעקת הנביאים, זעקת היתומים הגלמודים והנעזבים, זלזול חכמים ותלמידיהם האהובים. חיילים ראשי בית אבות גיבורים, חללים ובדוקרים נפלו מיליונים, חרפה ונשמה הייתה לגויים. טיפחנו וריבינו, אכזר כלל וחסימן, טרוף טרפו כזאבים לשפוך דמם, טבח 600 ריבו מזמן. ירדו חיים שאולה בשמע ישראל ובאני מאמין. יצאו לשמותיהם מוכרים בטלית ותפילין, יבושו ויקלמו ויהיו כעין הרוצחים. כלה שארינו ולבבינו על שבר חטאינו, כולנו נושאים קינה באובדן חצי עמנו. ישקולה השואה כשרפת בית אלוהינו, לאושוויץ, בוכנוולד, ברגן-בלזן, דכאו, מיידנק וטרבלינקה. לוקחו והודחקו בחדרי גז ונשרפו במורדות הכבשנים בחרפה. לחמו הקדושים הטהורים ונפלו כגיבורים בגטו ורשה. מכל פינה זועקים דמם הכבושים. מתי יבוא קץ כלפיהם האנושים? מספד מר וקינה שאו על הקדושים. נעצו הנועצים את הברית ואת תורתהם. נפלו עלינו בחורפיך ונפתה בצום נפשנו. נפלה עטרת ראשנו, אוי מה לנחלתנו. ספרי תורה נגזרים קראו ודינו בידיהם, סרקו בשר שארינו גורם הפכו לקישותיהם, סיפדו וחידרו שק והעלילו עליהם גבת הבן, עינינו זולגות דם ודמעות, על שרפת בתי כנסיות, על הריסת ישיבות ובתי מדרשות. פרצו קהילותינו והרסו עדתנו, פחד קראנו ורעדה אחזתנו, פנינו כסתה כלימה בצרותינו, צייה ערקו בחסר ובחפן, צנועות בנפשנו שלחו ידם, צעקה בים סוף נשמע קולה. רובים וידידים חביבים, חסידים וישרים, קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מזהירים, קבלם ואסתירם בצדק כנפיך לעולמים. רחום, זכור ברחמך את שרידי נחלתך, ריבון העולמים, הסר דאגה ותוגה מעמך, בשעת הגויים ושונאי ישראל תעקר בזעמך, שבויים הדרר, ובכך כוח לאסורנו, שמן ששון תחת אבל תיאטרנו, שלום ושלווה תשים לנו ולארצנו, תרים קרננו ותחיש גבולתנו במהרה בימינו, תגיע לרבה ותפרח חבצלת ישראל מדינתנו, תברכנו בברכת אברהם יצחק ויעקב אבותינו.
Before we wrap up, I want to just briefly add one other thing. A lament for Be'eri. Musician Yagel Harush writes, the lament for Be'eri was written after the tragedy of Simchat Torah this past year. It is simply unthinkable that we should need to add extra kinot to the ancient kinot that have already been written. The kinah was based upon the tune of a kinah which appears in the order of the kinot of the Moroccan community. Exile from the house of their joy. Surprisingly, the same tune is used for the prayers for rain, which are recited for Shmini Atzeret, to the tune of the Gerushin. Indeed, why did the Jews of Morocco choose to beseech God for rain in the tune of the Kinah? I heard from a lady Supri that the request for rain is a request for life. The tune was to encourage individuals to pray for his or her life with a broken heart. The day of Simchat Torah this past year, our dances turned into mourning, and the tune of the Kinah blends so poignantly with the request for life. But each and every Kinah ends with consolation. Similarly, we pray that we merit to see with perfect vision the reprieve and comfort that come after the eyes have been filled with tears, and the building of our city may be consoled. May God in His mercy give us merit very soon to write the hymns of our redemption. Be'er, be'eri, be'er, a well, is one of the metaphors in the Kabbalah for the Holy Shekhinah, the symbol of the manner in which the Creator gives the world life through the living waters that flow forth. The manner in which a well of life-giving water can become a cistern, a pit empty with no water, was a potent symbol for me for the events of October 7th. The names of the Yeshuvim that fell on Simchat Torah felt as if they themselves became the pages of a poem. The reports, Nachal Oz has fallen, Be'eri has been overrun, terrorists in Netivot. Sometimes divine providence writes a lament, a kinah, on the pages of reality. The process of writing a kinah is therapeutic. This is the author speaking. First, one needs to articulate the pain. One gives words which hurt on to the point of tear. Second, one requests through the pain, hoping to see through the tear-filled eyes the comfort and life that surrounds us. May my tearing eyes water Be'eri, the well where there was such suffering, and hopefully the well of the Shekhinah and the well of consolation. So maybe Dr. Seaman in English, if I could give it to you, let's read this one Kinah lament of Be'eri in English, and then we'll end with Elitzion.
How did Be'eri turn into my tomb, the day of my light, the day of my gloom? Its song silenced, trampled fruit and leaf, my eyes well with tears from the depth of my grief. How did the Torah, arranged and arrayed in all her glory, not rush to their aid? On the day of her beauty, my countenance stained, my eyes well with tears from the depth of my pain. How could Yisrael, when they call out to God, asking for life, receive nothing but blood? Elder and child till their blood overflow, their joy violated by bloodthirsty foe. My eyes go with tears from the depth of my woe. How could mothers and daughters, torn from their home, be led away, blood-soaked, like days of pogrom? Our dancing has ceased, our bodies are numb, their fences breached, dragged through the dirt. My eyes go with tears from the depth of my heart and my hurt. How we stagger and reel, Creator above. For how long can a nation bleed with love? Rise up now, shine forth, and we'll dance again. In your great mercy, please heal our pain. Heal our hearts, dispel our fears. Let us water Be'eri, the well of our tears.
It's interesting to note that the first building, it's very symbolic, that the first building that was fixed and returned back to full function is the printing office. It was very, within no time, I mean, like a month. The print, yes. That
Printing
was,
house.
The printing house. That was the very first building in Be'eri that was returned to full function.
We conclude on page 176. Let's all stand.
Elitzion v'yareha, kimlo isha b'sireha, v'chilis ulach agurasa, al bal nureha, al yarmon asher nukan, v'yashmason adoreha, v'yal v'yas v'farfel, v'saf v'kash karareha, al eglot Mishar Sayer, Ni'ime Shir Zimareho, Prialdam Asher Shupat, Kibal Mene Yoreho, Alego Micholeho, Asher Damam Liareho, Prialbag Asher Shamin, Vitu Sadhegria, Alezim Chesed Mineha, Ufit Yonein B'Choreha, V'yal Chimul Kileicha, Mizmach Kitoreha, Alei Tapei Melacheha, B'nei David Yirireha, V'yal Yafyam Asher Choshach, V'ei Sarut V'Sareha, Alei Chavod Asher Ola, V'ei Korban V'Vireha, V'yal Lochetz Asher Lochatz, V'sam Satim Chagoreha, Alei Machatz V'rol Makot, Asher Hukud V'Zireha, V'yal Niputz Elei Selah, Oleha Ni'areha, Alei Simchas Misaneha, V'sachakam Al Shivoreha, V'yal Inui V'nei Chorin, V'B'Av Zahoreha, Alei Pesha Asher Opsa, Silo Derech Ashureha, V'yal Simos Yoleha, Shizufeha Shechoreha, Alei Kolos Lichorfeha, V'yesh Rabu Fikareha, V'yal Rishas Igadefeha, V'sach Mishkan Chatzereha, Alei Shimcha Asher Kulal, V'fi Komai V'sareha, V'yal Tachat Yeshavua, Kisho Ushma Amareha, El Nitzion V'areha, Kimoisha B'Tzireha, B'Chniv Sula Chadurasak, Amal B'Ureha.
See 179. Last line. 179, last paragraph. Rachim Sim Kasher Mark, the one out of Shibaka, the Yeshua is a drug, you like Rachim Rami, the Zoya, the Yella, the Kola, is he vulnerable? We want to name to Shana both for them from us also. And go, Nihavadro, Axio, Muhapo, Nishlaim Nema, Nihavagwatsi, not from himself. We also need more occasion, Pablos, and go to some you must say, you must see what Kodove calls him now. Midnight, 2 o'clock. When is it? When do we come in? Second minute. 7. No, that's Shabbos. That's what we said. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Asher. 180. Asher Yeshua Secho, 180. Asher Yeshua do Asher, the Lord Leon. I'm not going to tell us. Great time, you know, you will do. מסביר לכל חי רצון צדיק עד עיני בכל דרך גלס אדוני דבר פיברי כל בוסו שאין קודשו גלם בועד ואנחנו לברך יומי הצו יד עולם הללויה וכל לציון גואל חיינו לא נתאבס, חיינו. יבדלו בכל יהודי שמרי גוזת ושחרת מינוי, אדוני לא בסלמן צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר. שתדל יסקדש מרבה, ילמוד יברוך ירוסי יומך מחוסי, חייכון ויומייכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל, עבודה בזמן קריבים ומי, איש מרבם בורך ולמרמי רמיה, סבורך וישתבח ויספוהר ויסרומם יסנעשי, יסדר ויסלם יסהלו שמן קדושה ושכו, לא מכל בגסה ושרסה, ועשה ולחמסה דמינו גלמה ומי, יש למרב ומשמיה, וחיים לרח ישראל יברומי, ועושה שלום ברמה, ויעשה שלום עלינו, כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
184. They don't show me how to go to the Yosef. It's so son. Enough. Go to the Din. You make my opinion with the solution. I can't miss my opinion episode. So. من يمر يا درم الخلق والرس ويومي أدري خالش مر مونس كارش يسكدال يسكداش من ربا يمادي برا كيروسي يوم مخوسي خيخان بميخان بخيل غو بيس إسرائيل ولا بس من كريدين برومي إيش من ربا وبراخ ولا من ميكل مايا سبراخ بيشتباخ بيسبوار بيسنوما بيسناسي بيسادار بيسالب بيسالو شميني قدشا بيخو the Elon called the Hassab Shirasa, Hassab and Hamasa, Namiram Yamabi Ruame, Yesh Lomara Mishmaya, Chaim Olivia, Israel Ruame, O Session Rama, Session Malavia, Israel Ruame.
So Mincha 2 and late Mincha at 7:30 and fast ends 8:35.
2 o'clock is
early, 7:30 till late.
That way we can read Tehillim.
And their movies.
Excuse me?
Somebody
Tehillim
said
today. What's Tehillim? Tehillim. You want to think?
They said they're waiting.
Yeah, we were waiting for the service to finish. It's starting now.
It's 2 o'clock. Early one's 2 o'clock and 7:30.